afternoon, everyone. If we could start trying to find our seats, we'll get started in about 2 minutes. This is your 2-minute warning. Thank you.
Well, first I made him go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Well, you told me I had to whistle, and I don't really want to whistle. I do that, just in my free time. Here I'm working. Welcome to the Augusta, Georgia CAB meeting for May 2017. Nina, would you like to open?
You did a really good job. You're good. Just keep going with it.
Just keep going?
Just keep going. You're good.
Okay. I thought you had remarks. No, not today.
That's tomorrow. We have our formal remarks tomorrow, but just thank y'all for being here and for being present. And we do have a new board member, Joyce Underwood, that will be joining us tomorrow. So I'm going to have her introduce herself when she comes in. But if you see her tomorrow, just take a moment to say hi and introduce yourselves. And then tomorrow, we'll have our more formal piece. Just let me know if you have any questions.
Yes, please do welcome Joyce when she comes in tomorrow. Delisa and I had the opportunity to meet with her on Monday of last week. Delisa graciously allowed me to tag along and do a brief orientation with her. And I think that you guys are really going to like her. Real quick, I just wanted to run through the agenda. We're going to have a brief update from the Nuclear Materials Committee. Then Kathy's going to give us an update on the FDSR, and we'll hear from Brian Hennessy as soon as he gets here. He's stuck in traffic on I-20, and so we'll jump ahead to some other agenda items if he doesn't make it past the accident that's apparently on the South Carolina side. And then it's your fault. It's all you. After that, we'll take a brief break. We'll go into strategic and legacy management. We'll hear a presentation on the unmanned aircraft systems, another one on historic preservation, and we'll talk about the strategic plan draft recommendation and the one on prescribed fire. Then waste management will come up, and Gil will give us a brief update, followed by Bill Barnes with a 3H evaporator status. Then we'll discuss two chairs recommendations, and we'll go more into depth on what those are, because I know we have several new members who aren't familiar with what the EMS SAB recommendation is and what it entails and what we do with it. So we'll talk a little bit about that first, and then we'll go into it. With that, let me hit the meeting rules for the day. We're going to ask that you hold all questions and comments until the end of the presentation. Help us adhere to the agenda timeline. Let's stay on topic as best we can. Please do not dominate the discussion or have side conversations. The microphones, even when they don't seem like they're projecting anything in the room, we do tend to pick it up, and it may record what you're having to say. So if you're saying something off to the side, please be aware it might make its way to YouTube. What's your name?
Thank you, James. I am Larry Powell, Chairman of the Nuclear Materials Committee. On the committee is Don Gillis, the Vice Chair, Gil Allensworth, Tom French, Susan Corbett, David Hall, Earl Shepard, Douglas Howard, Dan Kaminsky, John McMichael, Nina Spinelli, and Mary Weber. I noticed they only gave me 5 minutes for my portion of the meeting, and I think that's more than ample because we have no pending recommendations, no draft recommendations, so we're kind of quiet right now. We have one open recommendation, nuclear materials operation review. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Any other questions for Larry and the
Nuclear Materials Committee? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cap. No question. I just wanted to comment. I had the misfortune of traveling during that meeting time, so my apologies for not being able to attend in person, and then it didn't work out that I could attend live online. My fault, not anything on the system side. But I did go back and watch the YouTube videos,
Okay.
and I just want to commend that the stuff you're using now is very high quality. Not that I get credit for it, but I felt like I attended that meeting. It was very good. It's a very good quality.
Thank you, Dan. Your check's in the mail. Kathy, are you ready for FDSR?
Kathy Patterson, CAB. Welcome to Augusta. We have, our members are Don Gillis, Chair, Kathy Patterson, Vice Chair, Eric Crowson, I hope I pronounced Crowson, William Roten, Robert Smith, Nina Spinelli, Earl Shepard, Ed Sturkin, and Joyce Underwood. The committee purpose is on the board. You can read at your leisure. We have currently no open or pending recommendations. Our next committee meeting will be June 13, which is my birthday, 6:30 p.m. to 8:20 p.m. at the DO Meeting Center. All are welcome to attend. Actual action, all members to be there if at all possible. We have a presentation today, but as this has already been stated, we're going to delay the presentation because Mr. Hennessy is caught in traffic, so we will go on further into the agenda. We have a draft recommendation today, and the recommendation manager is Nina Spinelli, and I'm going to turn it over to her to discuss the recommendation.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm Nina Spinelli with the CAB, and we talked about this recommendation a couple of times at our last meeting. This one came out of a presentation that we had from the Forest Service out at the site. And I'm not going to read it to you, but the background is just really focused on pollinators and just sort of the history of pollinators. And I know y'all have had the chance to read it through your email, but the recommendations are the part that I just want to highlight. The Savannah River Site Citizens Advisory Board recommends that the Department of Energy, 1, work with the Forest Service to be represented in the Pollinator Health Task Force to learn more about how space at SRS could be used for pollination. 2, collaborate with Region 4 Environmental Protection Agency to develop a plan for pollination, including funding, management, and sustainability. And 3rd, given that funding may be a concern, consider working with local gardening clubs and associations that may be willing to assume some costs of the project. So before we go ahead and ask for a motion on this, does anyone have any feedback or any further thoughts that they might have that they didn't share at the last meeting? Larry?
Larry Powell, CAB. Dina, there's no mention there of the use of pesticides on the outside. I think it would be a good idea to put some wording in there that would request DOE to use more effective or a better source of pest control rather than chemical pesticides.
Okay, so can we do a number 4 on it and request the Department of Energy to use an alternative source
To chemical pesticides.
of chemical pesticides? Perfect, thank you. Guess we just kind of take that for granted.
It should be alternative to chemical pesticides. Sounds like you're changing the supplier.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
That was gonna be my question, they said that was gonna be
Fair enough. David?
David Hoyle Cab. Nina, my compliments on this recommendation. I do have a couple minor edits I'd like to suggest. In the last paragraph, just before the recommendation statement, it says the Savannah Riverside is a unique position of being protected land area the size of Atlanta, Georgia. Part of the current land is used to maintain a site barrier. I think you meant buffer there, a site buffer. And that large tracts of land are used to cover closed fields and ponds. I think what you're referring to are closed waste sites there. Is that not correct?
When I had looked it up, I think the word barrier was used in one of the reports that I had pulled because I was trying to find. I remember at one point we had something about the Atlanta, Georgia and the Beltway, and I was trying to find that report that we had. It was actually a presentation. And I think that was the word that was used, but I don't mind changing it from site barrier to site buffer. And we can change it to closed ponds and what was your other suggestion instead of fields?
Waste sites?
That's fine.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on changing those words? Is everyone okay with that?
Mr. Smith?
Maybe it's redundant.
Into the microphone if you would, please. Thank you.
Maybe it's redundant, but to me, it would just seem like we should also include the ecological lab in this as well, because they're already working on a pollinator program as well.
So maybe for recommendation number 1, work with the Forest Service and the National Lab. It's already on there? Did I hear that? No? Okay, so yeah. Yep, so right there where it says Forest
Type in
Service.
And SREL, and we'll expand the acronym out later.
Good, does everyone feel good about this one? Does anybody want to make a motion to approve?
Well,
Oh, wait,
you mean to vote on tomorrow?
stop changing all these words. Yes.
Yeah, because you're not going to vote on it until tomorrow.
I know, it's early still. So do we need to have a motion to take it for tomorrow, or are we good? Okay, so we're good. So David, just hold that for like 24 hours.
Okay.
All right, Kathy, I think we're good.
Is there anything else on this? Nope. Brian, I know you just walked in. You ready to go? Sure. All right.
My name's Brian Hennessy. I'm with DOE Savannah River, and I am the program manager for the Federal Facility Agreement. So my briefing to you all today is on the Federal Facility Agreement Community Involvement Plan. Okay, I'm doing this because I would like to provide an overview of what the Savannah Riverside Community Involvement Plan is, a little bit about its nature, the purpose of the plan, discuss some of the information that we gave in response to CAB recommendation number 338, dealing with the revision of the SRS Community Involvement Plan, and to meet the commitment in the FD and SR Committee's annual work plan. Here are some acronyms that will pop up during my briefing today. Let's see if there was any that I wanted to call your attention to in particular. CIP, the third one, CIP, stands for Community Involvement Plan, but over the decades, this particular plan has gone by other names. Initially, it was the Community Relations Plan, and for a while, it was the Public Involvement Plan. And this just depended on what the name of these documents was in the relevant EPA guidance at the time. And by the way, I should mention, is anyone here from EPA Region 4 today? Okay, I didn't think there was. So anyway, Rob Pope, my counterpart, the FFA manager, wanted me to extend his regrets that he couldn't be here, but we will make him aware of anything any input that you provide that needs EPA's attention. Let's see. Okay, I'll reintroduce you to any acronyms that we encounter. Okay, so why is there a community involvement plan at the Savannah River site? Well, CERCLA is a law that you've probably heard mentioned before. Stands for Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. It is a law, and there is a body of regulations to implement that law called the National Contingency Plan. It actually has a much longer name than that, but we call it the National Contingency Plan, or the NCP. And it alludes to the fact that due to the nature of this cleanup process, active communication between communities affected by discharges or releases and the lead agency responsible for response actions, that being in this case the Department of Energy, are necessary. Community relations plans are required by EPA for certain response actions. So that's in the NCP, that's in the regulation. CERCLA is not the only law that requires public or community involvement. RCRA also does, and there are other federal and state laws that require public participation, particularly at the point in the regulatory process where decisions are being made about whether something needs to be cleaned up, whether an action is needed, how it should be cleaned up, et cetera. And finally, the FFA itself, the Federal Facility Agreement for SRS, has a section, a small section called public participation. And it requires the DOE to prepare and implement a community relations plan. That's what it was called in 1993 when the FFA was launched, to fulfill the requirements of these other statutes and regulations. Okay, why is the SIP being revised? SIP, Community Involvement Plan, all right. EPA guidance on community involvement plans states that the SIP should be updated every 3 years or as required, whichever comes first. Okay, well, that's a bit of a head scratcher, but when you boil it down, I think it means every 3 years, okay? So the last SIP was approved and issued in 2011. So it's been a bit more than 3 years. The lead agency, again, that's DOE under the Federal Facility Agreement and CERCLA. The lead agency should determine whether additional community interviews are needed. So before we had an FFA, CERCLA had been enacted, RCRA existed, so there were reasons, there were legal requirements for community involvement, and indeed the site had community involvement as required by those laws. But for the very first official community relations plan, The site, various groups participated in the collection of community input via interviews and surveys to inform the very first community relations plan to determine what the community around the Savannah River site was concerned about regarding the site, its operations, and its cleanup. So there have been other iterations and revisions of the community relations plan, public involvement plan, community involvement plan since 1991. There have been several. But in 2011, that SIP stated that DOE would conduct a new round of interviews and re-baseline community concerns. In other words, we knew what they were in 1991, so now we're going to supplement that information with what community concerns are in 2017. Prior to the next update of the SIP, so that we can be sure that we're appropriately responding to those concerns and preferences for how the community would best like to receive information. This reference here is to the EPA Guidance document, Community Involvement Plans. So it's 2017. What's different today from the state of affairs in 1991? Well, as I said, we did the community involvement required by law and regulation before we had a community relations plan. But now we have a well-established and long-standing public involvement program, as you folks are well aware, probably more than most. So there are education outreaches to area schools that both DOE and our M&O contractor, Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, carry out. There is STEP, which was in the acronyms, Science and Technology Enrichment Program. There are science bowls, science fairs, which DOE employees and SRS employees are very instrumental in judging and putting on. There is stakeholder training, TREAT workshops, and that stands for Teaching Radiation, Energy, and Technology. And those workshops are given for teachers primarily, I think. Is that correct? Math and science, secondary math and science teachers, or maybe primary?
It's going that way.
Okay. Anyway, science and technology and math teachers in the CSRA. The Department of Energy participates in a lot of environmental justice activities with the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a very active program for EPA Region 4, and those events are normally in small communities. I'm sure that you've all seen environmental bulletins. You may get them in the mail, you may get them emailed to you, but there's a very large distribution that receives our environmental bulletins, and these are on a wide range of topics. We send these out when there is a decision document that's available for public review and comment. And for National Environmental Protection Act documents that are available for review. Just a couple of examples. The REMOP program is a relatively new one. I think it began in 2016. And this, if you haven't heard of it, this stands for Radionuclide Education, Monitoring, and Outreach Program. It's right here. And this is happening over in Shell Bluff, Georgia, near Waynesboro, Georgia, kind of close to the Vogtle nuclear power plants. Technically, that area is also within the environmental influence of the Savannah River site. So an education program and a sampling and analysis and public education program is being done for the citizens of Shell Bluff with the involvement of Georgia WAND. I'm not sure what WAND stands for, and I don't know that it was in my acronyms. But anyway, the Savannah River Ecology Lab is actually taking the lead on that program. And of course, the Citizens Advisory Board. You know that this is a very involved, very healthy two-way exchange between the site and some of its key stakeholders that's been going on since, I want to say, 1994. There some of you are. 1994. So obviously, when the Community Relations Plan was first written in 1991, we had no inkling that we were going to have a Citizens Advisory Board. It came along a few years later. And it has been a continuous venue, as I said, for the expression of community concerns and recommendations, and for two-way information, the sharing of information about the site's EM mission with you, a body of stakeholders, and the members of the public that attend these meetings as well. Also, in 1991, there may have been internet, but I know that all of us weren't actively using it. Internet, email, social media, it's bloomed to the point where communicating concerns, suggestions, and information between any two people or any two groups of people is different in a huge way from what it was 26 years ago. So according to that EPA guidance, what should be in a community involvement plan? And this is just sort of right out of the guidance. This is what the table of, or the contents should be. An overview, a capsule description of the site, community background, and the community background will include census information. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Community issues and concerns from interviews, see below, okay? Highlights of the SIP, community involvement activities and timing, a copy of the interview questions, a contact list, but not the names of private citizens interviewed or the site mailing list, locations of public meetings, location for the information repository, and local media contacts. All these things have been in the community involvement plan, and they will be in the next revision up to date. And just FYI, I want to mention here about the information repository. I'm sure that you've seen this mentioned in any environmental bulletin you've looked at on an SRS cleanup document. But our information repository, called our administrative record file, there are copies that the public can get to in two places. The University of South Carolina Aiken Library has a government documents section, and the USC Columbia Library, the Thomas Cooper Library at USC Columbia, has a government documents section, and there's somebody there that can point you right to the drawer that has all the CDs on it with all the SRS administrative record file documents. And there are two other locations, one in Augusta, at Augusta University in their library, and one in Savannah at the Savannah State University Library. And when one of our cleanup decision documents is available for public review and comment, the document is available for your use or for your viewing at any four of those locations, or any of those four locations, and also online. There are, I'll give you the website in a minute where you can find out if there are any documents available for public comment, and also where you can see the community involvement plan. What else does this EPA SIP guidance say? Okay, the SIP guidance is written for a site where EPA has the lead in planning and implementing the cleanup. And that describes a lot of Superfund sites around the country where the company or the individual that was responsible for creating the pollution is no longer around, can't be identified, and so EPA takes over those cleanups under its own initiative and using its own dollars from the Superfund. So this SIP guidance is really written for an EPA project manager on one of those sites, but naturally it can be adapted for use by another lead agency as DOE has adapted it for SRS. And it is clear in that guidance that the SIP is prepared as the lead agency's guide in planning public involvement activities. In other words, it's DOE's guide. It is not the public's guide or the community's guide for how to engage in site two-way communication. It is the lead agency's guide for how to conduct community involvement. It's a plan. It's a statement of what DOE does and what it intends to do to ensure that community and stakeholder awareness and involvement are healthy, and that we're meeting the statutory public requirements of those laws that I showed you earlier, RCRA, CERCLA, the National Contingency Plan, and others. It's for use by DOE and its contractors. DOE has its own Office of External Affairs. You know who some of those people are. You see them at every one of these meetings. SRNS also has a corporate communications group or public affairs or some title like that, and they give a lot of assistance with public outreach. The current, which is the 2011 Community Involvement Plan, is available on the SRS external website, srs.gov. There's a row of banners across the top. One of them is called Documents and Publications. And on that drop-down, you will see the SRS Community Involvement Plan. And there's also a DOE Savannah River Operations Office website at sro.srs.gov. And there's a documents list shown at the bottom of the page, and if you click on that, the SIP is among those documents. So, stakeholder input should inform the SIP. That's why when we created the first one, we went out, as the guidance told us we should do, and surveyed and interviewed members of the public. Because it's vital to know what the community around the cleanup site is concerned about, what they want to know about it, and how they want to receive information. So the next revision of the SIP will include, as I mentioned earlier, updated census information. The 2011 SIP had the census information in that one was from 2000. The 2010 census wasn't ready yet for us to use in that 2011 document. So this time it will be 2010, or if there's more recent data than that from counties or states or whatever, we'll use it. We'll update the SRS cleanup timeline. Naturally, there's one in there that only goes up through about 2010. So this one will bring us, or bring readers up to the, close to up to the moment. It'll have a summary of all the statutory and regulatory requirements for public participation. Notably, it will include updated community and stakeholder concerns about SRS operations and cleanup, and community and stakeholder preferences for receiving information. And that information will be updated because of the interviews and surveys that we will do between now and the time this revision is complete. And it will have an evaluation of those current concerns and preferences. In other words, we're not just going to collect them and list them in this document. We're going to put some thought to what they mean and how they should impact our community involvement activities. And those changes, the results of that analysis, those changes will be in the SIP. And anything that we think will make two-way communication better between the site and the community. So that banner up there is from an environmental bulletin, just to jog your memory. I'm sure you've seen one. How will community concerns and information preferences be updated? DOE will be announcing that the SIP is being revised. We will use environmental bulletins and other print media. We will make it known at all SRS community and stakeholder meetings and events, and others as appropriate, meaning over the next several months, we may announce and hold meetings strictly for the purpose of collecting input for the community involvement plan. We will be soliciting comments and suggestions on this revision, and they can be submitted to us via email or social media. I know we have a Facebook account, Twitter account too, probably. Is that true, Delisa? Or Facebook? Okay. During any SRS community event or meeting on the SIP revision, or via survey forms that you will begin seeing at meetings like this, CAB or other SRS community events and meetings, there will be survey forms. And these are not going to be complicated surveys, all right? There won't be 40 or 50 questions on this. It'll basically be asking, what are you concerned about and how would you like to get your information? And there'll be more information about that in the very near future. And as I've mentioned, there will be surveys and interviews similar to those that were done before the very first Community Relations Plan in 1991. And of course, we're interested in any suggestions you have regarding any aspect of the next revision of the SIP. Do you have any questions for me?
I believe I saw Mr. Malik first.
Narendra Malik. If there is any release from the SRS for radionuclides, how do you inform the public to get their input into?
I don't really know. We have emergency management folks that could answer that question, but I can't answer that for you. Terry, Michael, do you have any?
So this is
Know anything
Michael
about that?
Elias, Department of Energy. We publish an annual site environmental, we publish a report annually on the site environmental impacts. It's called the ACER, and I can't remember, Annual Site Environmental Report. And it'll provide a summary of all the radionuclide and other contaminants that make it into the waterways and off-site. If we were to have an exceedance of a regulatory requirement, we have various discharge permits that the state approves. If we were to exceed any of those, we make a notification to the state, and we would take any action thereafter if we had to. So those are the two primary ways: our annual report and any upsets that occur through notification to the state. Obviously, if there was a major incident, a major release, well, we'd be activating the emergency response organization, and there's a component of the emergency response organization that provides information to the public. I hope that answered your question.
If I may continue, I have a personal experience. There was some leak in, I think, one of the tanks in F-tank form, and there were a lot of information distributed to local elected officials like mayors and county chairmen and senators and congressmen. So is that part of the SIP too?
To notify elected officials?
Yes.
The real-time notification about an event like that, I don't believe is part of the community involvement plan. It may be, and if it is, sir, I apologize, but it escapes me right now. That is available online. I will look as soon as I get an opportunity, and I invite you to do the same.
Thank you.
But you know, if there were a significant radiological event at the site, somehow they get onto the news, right? I mean, there are news media get notified somehow. I do not want to say anything else that the Office of External Affairs should be saying, but yeah, there are.
Jim Giusti with DOE, the Director of the Office of External Affairs for 3 more days. In the event of a release that would have any, that's abnormal or beyond what we expect for our permits, that would have any impacts, potential impacts off-site, we have an emergency response system that we would then notify the appropriate elected official, emergency response official, the news media. If you're talking about an incident like the Hanford this last week, we have the same type of emergency response system that would respond and would provide the appropriate notifications and would work with the state to put out any information that needed to reach the public in addition to what we have. So when an event takes place that is what we consider an emergency, we have a way of communicating that to the public. The news media is the main channel that we use to get that information out to the public because they're 24/7. We also have our social media accounts and other things that we use. And we have employed them in the past in the 2 security events that we've had recently in the last couple of years. So we know we know it works, it's there, and we train with it all the time.
And Jim, when you say the state, you would be referring to South Carolina and Georgia as appropriate, right?
We would notify both states,
Right.
yes.
Mr. Lyon? And then I believe I saw Susan's and then David?
Jim Lyon. Is this thing on? All right. I'm looking at your CIP vision. What will it include? Updated SRS cleanup chronology timeline. I have some experience in this. And referring to the Hanford site, just as an example, taking us out of here. Some people say that Hanford resisted cleanup for years and years and years. Actually, it was a process of budgeting. First, the Atomic Energy Commission, then Department of Energy. Right now, they're looking at cleanup extending into 2060, and I believe that's actually optimistic. I used to be Deputy Chief of Staff for Defense Operations and Staff Engineer for 6th Army on the West Coast. And dealing with Hanford as a possible disaster, dealing with earthquakes, dealing with one thing and another, and the possible responses we had, just brought this to my attention. And what I'd like to know is how, in your new budget, how your timeline's going to run. The biggest variable in a timeline in the federal government is the government's attitude towards getting something done, and that's expressed in dollars. If you have fewer dollars this year to do the job, that extends the cleanup well into the future, and I might add at a higher cost. And in my own programs in the military, I have to tell you, I experience this a lot. That's actually a statement, I guess, and not necessarily a question. Will the CIP discuss or reveal the budget for cleanup and how it differs from the current budget, and whether it's more or less, and what the timeline revision will be, either further into the future or bringing it closer into us, or will it be exactly the same? You may not be able to answer that at this time, but I would like to know if that data will be included in your CIP. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can answer it. No, that's not within the scope of this plan. And when I alluded to a cleanup timeline, it was a retrospective timeline. It was, from the beginning of the site operations up through the beginning of the cleanup program and up through the current day. That's all. It's not forward-looking, prospective, nothing to do with budget at all. It's DOE's plan for conducting community involvement strictly. No, it's not a DOE program planning document as broadly as you've described.
Now, Mr.
Well,
Lyon,
then to follow up, you're saying you don't have any knowledge of their programming and budgeting, what they plan for the future, whether you will do more in the future, less in the future, or the same amount of work.
I'm saying that that's not within the scope of this community involvement plan. It's a plan on how to conduct our community involvement. That's all it is.
Well, actually, I think it's a shortfall,
Mr.
and I
Lyon,
think it
there'll
should be included.
Excuse me. There'll be a presentation on the budget tomorrow, so if you want to hold into your questions about some long-term planning questions related to budget specifically, I think that you might be able to ask some of those tomorrow. Okay?
I hope you just said that some address will be given to that, but I don't hear very well that my first years in the military were just nothing but gunfire, helicopters, and heavy equipment. All right, thank you very much.
Sure. You're welcome.
Susan, I think you were next.
Susan Corbett, CAB. Two questions. Maybe, I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding this, but what will be your determination, the demographic of people that are going to be interviewed? How will you select them? Is this just random? How are you going to find these people that will be interviewed? How do they get selected, or what's that process? Did I miss that in here?
No, it's not. We don't
Okay.
have that process yet, Susan. But
Well,
I can tell you that we will use the demographic that was used in '91 as a,
And what was that?
well, there were members of the public.
And how did you find those members of the public? Is there something in the newspaper calling for people?
I wish I knew. I don't
So
know. Before
because
my
this makes a
time.
huge difference, in my opinion, how you actually find people to take these interviews. I'm just curious as you have ideas. Okay, so
Well, I'm
members of the
curious if-
public, and then what else?
There were some medical personnel, public health. There were elected officials from both states.
I'm sorry, from what? Both states?
Elected officials
Okay.
from Georgia and South Carolina. There were staff members of the congressional delegations, I believe, that were interviewed back then. No, I don't know how the members of the general public were selected back then.
All right, well, let me just make a comment that this is a concern to me, because I think that you definitely have people who have a preset bias going into this, and they're not going to be objective about the question. So I'm concerned that if you're really interested in the community, this needs to be more the public and not people that have a vested interest in this industry or this location, including politicians. So I'm just concerned about what the makeup of these interviews. The other thing I just want to say is that the DOE gets a lot of input from the public. I mean, I've been going to public meetings down here since 1990-something, okay, all over the place. And I have never come away convinced that anything the public has said has changed the DOE's mind. It feels to me like the DOE is doing this because they have to, because of the law. But my question is, how will the DOE integrate and take seriously the concerns of the community? Will they change their plan? Will they change their agenda? Or is this just, getting people's feedback that then gets filed away in a file cabinet, but no action is taken on it? How can we be sure, as members of the public, that our concerns will somehow change the direction of the DOE or the plan or their actions or whatever they do?
Well, this input that we're soliciting, we're going to use to evaluate whether we need to modify the way we do community involvement. And that is the purpose of the input at this moment, okay? Now, what the results of all that community involvement are going to be over the coming years and decades, I can't say, but we do it for a reason. We do it, we want to know and we need to know what the communities around our site are concerned about. And we're in a new day of communication. We need to know how the people that we talk to, the people we survey, the people we interact with, how they like getting their information, because it's not 1990s anymore. But the community involvement plan is not going to say how the Department of Energy going forward is going to use public input. That's kind of outside the scope of the plan.
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, how are
David
you,
Hoyle,
David?
CAB. Brian, you mentioned early in your presentation that there is EPA guidance on preparation of the community involvement plan. Is that EPA-wide, or is that specific to Region 4, specific to the Savannah River site? What kind of guidance is that?
I'm sorry, it's national guidance.
It is national guidance.
Yes.
Could we get a copy of that guidance?
Sure, and I could, I know it's online. I'd be happy to, I don't have a copy with me, but on EPA.gov, if you put community involvement plan in a search field somewhere, I know that it would take you to a lot of things, a lot of community involvement plans, but you would also be able to find that guidance. I could provide you with a link to this guidance.
That'd be great.
Through our CAB portal.
And
That'd be
this is
great.
Michael McLance with the Department of Energy. We'll provide a copy to the CAB support team.
Great, thank you. Also, will the community involvement plan, when you revise it, be put out for public comment before you finalize it?
As of right now, all I know is that we are going to announce that that the revision is in preparation. I don't think any prior revision was made available for public comment. So I don't really know, David. That would be a departure, and it is not a document that would require public review and comment, I don't believe. Boy, I wish Rob Pope were here. He'd probably have a lot of good information for you. So I guess at this point I have to say I don't know, but they have not been in the past.
And Michael McLance, Department of Energy, again, we will follow the same process we used for the previous community involvement plans, and that's presuming they're consistent with the EPA guidance. So no, we don't intend to depart from anything we've done in the past, assuming the past was done correctly.
Even if the public requests it?
We're going to follow the EPA's guidance. We're not going to go create a new process for you, David.
It's not for me. Brian, on your slide number 6, I believe, you give a listing of a number of methods for public involvement, and many of them appear to be, public education and outreach kinds of things, basically where you're telling the public how we do things. A few of them, like the environmental justice activities and, of course, the CAB, are venues where the public gives you input. In fact, the CAB's probably the principal one there. on page 10, you say part of the update will include updating of stakeholder and community concerns, as well as their preferences for receiving SRS information. CAB recommendation 338 included a recommendation that we thought it was a good idea for DOE to mine the over 340 recommendations the CAB has given DOE on this very topic, our concerns and our recommendations for receiving information. Yet DOE's response to that recommendation was that it's not required by EPA guidance and it's not necessary. Why does DOE feel that way when it's such a rich treasure trove of information?
Michael McAlance, Department of Energy. David, we've discussed this at previous committee meetings. The Department of Energy, and we've consulted with the EPA on this, it would take a fair amount of resources to go through and delve through hundreds of CAB recommendations. The department is focusing the resources that we have on the venues that we feel will give us the best information. If you wish to, as a member of the public, peruse through that and bring something to David's attention as a member of the public, you are free to do it. But that's not going to be part of the community involvement plan, as we mentioned in the response to the CAB.
Well, I think that's quite foolish, but
I understand your opinion. You've expressed it at many meetings, but this is the department's position, and the CAB has sent nothing further that would change our opinion.
that's all I have. Thank you, Brian.
You're very welcome.
Gil, I see your card is up.
Gil Allens with CAB. Hey, Brian, thanks a lot. You mentioned on slide 10 about the census. Are you going back to 2010 census?
And I'm talking about a national census now.
Yes.
Yeah, is there, I'm not an expert. I'm assuming that it's done every 10 years, and maybe it's done more frequently than that.
I'm just wondering if we're going back to 2010 or are we looking forward to 2020? And it's just been in the news recently that the census may see some serious funding cuts to it. That concerns me, following up with Susan's worry of how are we getting the people involved. I'm a little worried about the census numbers. If
It would be the most recent past census.
the most recent past. Okay,
Yes.
perfect, thanks.
All right.
Mr. Malik?
I'm Narendra Malik, CAB. I'm following up with Susan's comment. Isn't it possible to have public meetings before you revise your SIP from different communities and get their input, and instead of just going and doing some surveys?
It is possible.
So what's the path forward?
I'm sorry?
What's the path forward?
We haven't made plans yet. And I want you to know, this revision is not something that's coming out next month. It's something that's going to come out toward the end of FY 2018, okay? 15 or 16 months from now. So there's time to plan the surveys and the interviews, the meetings that we decide to hold for gathering public input. And you know, there are meetings that we hold around the area for other purposes. And I'm hoping that we might be able to use those meetings also for the purpose of making known this revision and that we're seeking input for it. It will be in the announcement of those meetings if we do.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Marilyn, you've been super patient. Would you like to?
Yes, Marilyn Parson, Bluffton, South Carolina. Well, James, I just wanted to make sure that I'm not out of order. I thought at a combined committee meeting, the public can participate in the meeting and not just at public comment?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. Again, Marilyn Parson, Bluffton, South Carolina. On slide 11, under soliciting comments and suggestions, the third, it says via surveys that will be available at CAB and other SRS community events and meetings. Will the survey also be available online? Or is it only going to be passed out at community, well, what you say here?
Now, what it says here is that they will be available at these meetings, but by no means does suggest that it won't be available online, and I think that's a great idea.
Okay. The other thing, I do hope that the interviews will be fairly, the people that come to, that are invited to come or have an opportunity to come, that it goes beyond just the counties surrounding the site, but will also include some downstream communities. I hope that that will be considered. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you, Marilyn.
Mr. Walters?
Good afternoon, Louis Walters, just recently at the CAB. I was going to remain silent, but there is something that I wanted to just point out and at least get a response from Brian on this. There's been tremendous information on the news that the EPA itself, the entity itself, is being revamped and being, some units have been cut, eliminated, etc. Particularly, I'm talking about, if you look at page 3, specifically the second slide, community involvement, 1991 versus 2017. As you go further down on the list that's mentioned, you have environmental justice activities. It is my understanding that the environmental justice unit has been eliminated from EPA. So my question to you, basically, and I know with the CPI, whether or not the Department of Energy is going to be seeking assistance or participation, let's say, from the Georgia Environmental Group and also South Carolina, based on probable elimination of activities by the EPA. I know the community is very concerned about that. I've been meeting with individuals at Shell Bluff, for example. They've asked me to come in and do some assistance with them in regards to that. So one reason why I'm not on the CAB is one of those activities involved with that. So I just wanted to pass that on. There apparently will be and has been dramatic changes to the EPA. So this information that you have here does not appear to be current. Okay, Brian?
We're going to, it's unfortunate that the EPA Region 4 folks are not here today. They couldn't be here. That is something that I'll pass on to my counterpart at EPA so that he can respond to you. Now, I don't want to tread into any other waters here, although the latest I've heard is that EPA is not going to be cut in this fiscal year, and I don't know that their fiscal year 18 budget has been decided yet. So as far as this information not being current, I'm not sure that environmental justice activities aren't still going on today.
Brian, let me just clarify. Specifically, the Environmental Justice Unit has been eliminated. It's no longer there. So in page 3, second slide, where you mentioned, or it's mentioned, environmental justice activities, which you understand activities versus a unit. Those activities are usually done in partnership with the Environmental Justice Unit of EPA.
I see.
That unit no longer exists as of last week or the week before. So I'm just throwing that out, that's the reality. And I think the CAB needs to look in terms of the changes that will be coming down or have been coming down, EPA, and how that will affect any future community environmental analysis. That's all that I'm saying.
Thank you.
Okay?
Well,
Thank you.
I've made a note of that. And if there is any change institutionally at EPA, that will be reflected in the community involvement plan. But there are other people here who probably have more direct knowledge of that environmental justice situation at EPA.
It just so happens that DOESR's environmental justice coordinator is here. Delisa?
Hey, Louis, Delisa Carrico, DOE. You're right about the EPA Environmental Justice Program, but Span River Site also has an environmental justice program that we partner with Savannah State University. And so we put on things such as the treat workshop. And we also hold joint community meetings and we will do that in the future. EPA and DOE would partner doing that, but since their funding might be jeopardizing some of their leading the meetings, DOE-SR will be still having those meetings.
But they will still be environmental justice activities?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for the question.
Marilyn Parson, Bluffton, South Carolina. Brian, what budget year is money for this update included in?
Well, we'll be doing some activities this year and some in 18, but it's not a this is not a tremendous burden on our budget. So FY 17 and 18, Marilyn.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions for Brian? So let's keep in mind that this is going to be on your agenda for Facilities Disposition and Site Remediation Committee in June. We're going to ask that you come back and talk about the community involvement plan some more. As you see, DOE is interested in the suggestions you have. So you had some great questions now, and I can't wait to see the discussion that you guys have in June regarding any suggestions that you may come up with. Anything else, Brian?
Not from me, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So after the last meeting, I went back and I looked at the agenda, and we mapped out all the times, and I crunched down all the times on this agenda to match what you guys did last March, and you still flew through it. So we're running a little bit ahead. We were scheduled for a break. Who's okay with continuing going forward with strategic and legacy management now? I know our first presenter's here. We're good? Yeah. David, do you have any objections? I know you're sitting in for Bob today.
No objections.
Well, would you like to give the update for SNLM, please?
I'd be happy to. David Hoyle, CAB. Bob Dorr can't be here today, so he asked me as the vice chair to handle things for him today. He will be here tomorrow. The committee members for the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee are Bob Dorr, chair, myself, Gil Allensworth, Rose Dobson Elliott, Jim Lyon, Earl Shepard, Nina Spinelli, David Vogavakis, and Mary Weber. The purpose of the committee is to deal with long-term policy planning and other strategic matters, including issues that typically cross-cut the work of other CAB committees. You can see in that paragraph some of the specific examples of the areas that are of interest to us. At our, well, we currently have a couple of open recommendations. Recommendation 338 concerning revision of the Savannah Riverside Community Involvement Plan. We just talked about that a little bit. The committee is not ready to call that recommendation closed and have not made such a recommendation to the full board yet. I'm not sure. James, help me with the other committee, or the other recommendation. I think the committee did vote to propose to the full board to close the military training.
I believe so, yeah. I think
And we'll
talking
take
about
that up tomorrow, I believe,
Absolutely.
as a vote. We had a meeting in April, and the topics that were discussed during that meeting included drone flights over the Savannah River site, input to DOE's update of their site strategic plan, and also a discussion on prescribed burning at the Savannah River site. As a matter of fact, we have two recommendations that we will be putting forth to the full board tomorrow. One is on the SRS strategic plan. The other is on prescribed fire. We have a recommendation that's been proposed to the committee on unmanned aerial vehicles. However, we decided to table that until we were able to hear more from the Department of Energy concerning that topic.
Okay. I think that's it. Monty, I'm sorry, David, was that Was there anything else?
Well, I believe we have some presentations here today.
We do, yes.
In fact, the very first one is by Monty Volk on unmanned aerial vehicles.
Good afternoon. How y'all doing? I'm Monty Volk from Office of External Affairs. Okay. All right, I'm going to talk about unmanned aircraft systems. When I was presented with the opportunity to talk about UAS at the CAB, I volunteered. I jumped up and down. I was so excited to do it. Actually, it's about the same as when I got all the media queries when we were having this back in June. But I thought that context is always important when we discuss things. So first thing, what is a UAS? Everybody most notably calls it a drone. Military, you call it a UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, or unmanned aerial system. But unmanned aircraft system is how FAA defines it. And then if you look, public law has a definition. And then down here, you have 14 CFR Part 107, which we'll hit a couple times as we go through, which is kind of the important thing here. And the rules define small UAS. So, rules for operating UAS. I said rules. Since 2008, FAA had been looking at pursuing rules to kind of govern UAS in the National Air System. 2012, Congress passed the FAA Modernization and Reform Act. And in that, it charged the Secretary of the FAA to go and look at producing some rules to govern UAS operations within the national airspace. So the planning considerations, the guidance that they gave them was the operation must not create a hazard to users of the national airspace system or the public. The operation must not pose a threat to national security. So those were the two forms of guidance that they received, and they said go out and make some rules. So they had various work groups and meetings and things like that, and then in 2015, in February of 2015, they announced to the public that they were going to have rules, and they put those rules out. Public comment period, all that other good stuff. And then in June, those rules were released to the public and then had a 60-day grace period. And then so those rules went into effect in late August, August 29th, I believe is when they were actually official, of 2016. Those dates are kind of important as we go forward. I know that people want to know about the Savannah River site and UAS activity out there, so just remember those dates. Rules released June of 2016, went in effect in August of 2016. So here's some of the examples of the rules. You know, flying for work or business, pilot requirements, aircraft requirements, operating rules. And if you note, there's a lot of asterisks on there, and it says rules subject to waiver. Why is that? Well, the FAA, knowing that the technology with UAS and the availability and how we can use them and things like that is ever changing. So they want to be able to create a system that you could do waivers that are approved by FAA or whatever entity you're going to be working with. They also have rules for flying for fun or recreation. And then you have those. I won't read through them. I'm sure you all are capable of reading those. But the, you know, again, so let me back up one here. For work or business, what are examples of work or business? So you'd have, you know, crop monitoring, inspection, fire. You have forest fires or prairie fires or things like that, and you could set them up, kind of get a scope of things. So there's a multitude of uses, and again, it's changing. So how we use those and incorporate them into our daily lives and activities, it'll change. Fun, obviously, recreation, hobby. SRS UAS sightings. So June 19th to July 22nd, 2016, Savannah River site experienced 12 reported UAS sightings of possible UAS flying over the site. Based on the details obtained during the response and assessment of those 12 reported sightings, 8 U.S. sightings were reported to the appropriate authorities for determination if further action was necessary, and 4 of the reported sightings resulted in no confirmation of U.S. operations. So, as I said, the rules came out in June. June 19th is when we had our first. The rules were actually issued on June 21st, so just prior to. And then August is when the rules went into effect. And then you see July 22nd to present, we had 8 preliminary reports. Based on the follow-up assessments and inquiries, no USs were located or confirmed. So Now, going back to the rules, the important thing with the rules is that most Americans are law-abiding citizens. So therefore, if you have the rules in place, you're going to follow those rules. If you're operating a UAS and you're following the rules, it won't be flying over the Savannah Riverside. So that's good. I mean, you look at the rules and it's there. So when we progress regulating the airspace, currently, FAA lists SRS airspace in the National Airspace System and establishes it as a national security area. So basically that means that there's a notice to airmen that pilots are supposed to follow saying that, hey, avoid SR airspace and do not fly below 2,000 feet. And that is so, one, you know of activity. If I'll use an analogy of the perimeter of the site. So on roads, we have gates and obstructions to prevent people from coming on site. In the air, if you were to extend those gates all the way up, you don't have that same luxury. You know, so we've had questions of, you know, hey, you have a UAS flying over the Savannah Riverside, why don't you take it down? Well, if we had a random car that came through the gate, we just don't shoot the car. You know, I mean, that's not as safe. That's not how we want to operate and conduct business. So the same thing applies. You know, what is the intent of that UAS that is up there? You don't know. But if you have rules in place that govern it, and again, law-abiding citizens following that, if now you have a UAS that enters the Savannah Riverside, what are your options? It got lost. Maybe somebody is trying to do something that you know, nefarious activities, if you will. But it helps to kind of shrink down what are the possibilities that are there. Questions? I left lots of time for questions because I figured I'd get a bunch. And I'll do my best to answer them.
Mr. Powell.
Larry Powell, Cab. What is the difference between rules and laws, and what are the repercussions for breaking rules?
Well, Congress makes the laws, the public laws that are available. So CFR, the 14, Part 107 is actually a federal law. And then the rules that are underneath it. And then I have a copy of the, let me grab the, they do have various, from suspension of the pilot license, because if you remember on there, they're supposed to require a pilot license. So they have anything from, you know, not allowing them to fly again, kind of like a pilot, you know, would lose their license if they did some violating laws and regulations and things like that. So the same thing could happen to a UAS pilot that's operating that, not in conjunction with the established guidance that's up there. So to answer your question. Specifics, I can share a copy of this with you and you can get them, so, but.
Thank you.
Mr. Hoyle.
David Hoyle, Cab. I was looking at the slide where you talk about recreational or hobby use of these devices, and you don't mention the 400 feet altitude requirement that is under the work or business requirements. Is there a difference there? Is there a limitation for recreational use?
Yes, it's the same.
It is the same?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Howard.
So, well, I have one more question, James, if I may. So if somebody was flying a drone, say they launched from off-site of SRS and flew it on SRS, what rules are broken?
Well, first of all, you have to, we can go back to, let's see, go to slide 4. You have to fly during the day, so if we're assuming that it's during the day. Line of sight, which means the line of sight of the operator, not a spotter that's with the individual. And then, you know, you have must fly under 400 feet. So those are the rules that, and depending, it could be any, all, some of those particulars that you're looking at.
So if the person was off-site, okay, I see he's not line of sight, because I believe these drone sightings were far interior to the site. So I get that one. Do you know how high these things were?
I don't.
So we don't know if the 400-foot rule was violated.
At that particular point in time, that's correct. I don't
Right.
know.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand what rules were broken here, and it appears to be the line of sight one.
And I was going to say, and at the time, when you look at our dates from, the June dates, up until August 29th, there wasn't really any rules. Until the rules actually went into effect, there was nothing that was really enforceable. The FAA, at that particular point in time, if somebody was operating outside of these guidelines here, they received an FAA letter that said, hey, look, there's rules to operate the, UAS, the National Air System. These are the particular rules. We ask that you adhere to these rules as you go forward. Now, since August, they have actions that they can progressively take to do that. And like I said, it's listed out in that 14 CFR Part 107.
And do I understand correctly that a private airplane flying above 2,000 feet is free to fly over the Savannah River site and take photos?
Correct.
Okay. And I believe I saw in the paper or read or heard on the radio that the FAA just lost a court case where people flying these UAVs are now by court order not required to get a registration.
And they have the registration in here, and I'm not a UAS expert, but I do know that they have, with their operating rules of registration, they have requirements, whether it's more than 55 pounds, less than 55 pounds, how you go about registering that, and things like with the FAA. So I don't know exactly what you're referencing. I don't
Oh,
know
okay.
for sure.
I'm sorry. I did hear something about an appeals court ruled just this past week on that topic, saying registrations weren't required.
Okay.
Thank you.
I got Mr. Howard first.
Doug Howard, Cap. Going back to David's question, if a drone was spotted here at CRS, the procedure would be to report it to the FAA, or do you all do the investigative work to find out, any kind of background?
Or just for the Savannah River site?
The Savannah River site.
For the site itself, we call it into our alert number that we have and say that, we have potential UAS. And then we have our protection forces in Terra, which will come out and do an initial investigation, interview people that were in that particular area, assess what's happening, and then make further determinations based upon that. If somebody were to have photographic evidence, if there would be, collaborating stories, if there would be multiple sightings from across the site, whatever it may be, they'll put all that together and then make a determination as to, does it need to be referred to the appropriate local, state, or federal authorities for further action.
Does the security teams here on the Savannah River site, at the Savannah River site, or do you have teams that are, that have that ability to spot drones, or, do you have teams that are dedicated to do that?
As far as, I think that your individual protective force personnel, they're trained to either watch the gates, do their routes that they have on site and things like that. So as far as anything beyond that, I'm not certain on their specialties or certifications, but I do know that they have adequate training to identify certain things. And then the other thing is, the people that they interview, the investigation piece of that initial analysis that they do to see, okay, we have 4 people, they all describe the same thing, about the same height, headed the same direction. Now you have, if that makes sense, it's kind of how, when you do your investigations, you kind of piece that information together, and as you go, and you're like, okay, this is credible, or this is not credible, or yes, I see what you're looking at, but that's a star, or whatever it may be. I don't know. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mr. Lyon.
These drones are scary. I'm pretty sure that someone with nefarious intent would not really make himself known as the operator. And in fact, you probably wouldn't see him. And I'm kind of curious if there's an actual plan for intercepting drones. it seems to me that we have a situation in which SRS, but mega multiples of targets, possible targets, are in fact rather passive because we don't have a countermeasure for the drones. You know, maybe radio signal interrupters or something would help, but I think it's something to think about. That's all. Thank you.
Ms. Corbett, is that you?
That's me.
All right.
So maybe, Susan Corbett, CAB, so maybe I'm kind of echoing what Mr. Lyons just said, so maybe I've been watching too many sci-fi movies, but I'm under the impression that these drones can actually carry things, right? Like they can deliver pizzas, right? So,
If anybody watched the NBA All-Star game, the slam dunk challenge, they used it to
Right.
drop a
so
basketball.
they could be used to drop an explosive device. Is that not true?
Potentially, yes.
Right. So this is our risk here. Has there been a risk assessment done of this possibility?
And just to take a step back and caveat, this is not just a DOE thing. This is a federal government thing, and
Of course.
everybody's trying to wrestle with how do you control it, what do you do, what rules you put in place to make those things. And as Mr. Lyons pointed out, somebody with nefarious intents, they're not going to register, they're not going to abide by any of the rules, they're not going to do any of those particular things. So what comes next? Currently, the FAA is looking at different technologies to detect them as they're flying, different ways to safely render them useless, if you will, bring them down, if you want to use that terminology. But they're exploring options, and currently there's not a government-wide option. I know DOD just recently, using one of the a regulation of public law, prohibited or actually restricted drone flights over 133 military installations. Wouldn't work for all of them, but for those particular installations, they were able to do it. Now, just because there's a restriction in place, again, somebody with, bad intent, it doesn't matter. But right now, we're looking, and there's, NNSA is actively looking for options, along with DOD and other entities that are looking to.
I mean, really, it's not just here, it's every nuclear power plant, especially the old Mark Is with the open spent fuel pool up top. Those are all incredibly at risk for that kind of a drop. It could be very devastating. So just curious if there's been any missile shield or something, or interference with the controlling or something thinking going on here.
And I will tell you, I was just one comment. From having my name in the paper quoted with the sightings, no less than a dozen private companies have sent, those particular things. Hey, this is what we're capable of doing, and I've shared all those with headquarters so that they can look at and see what's available out there and discuss what is the best path forward for, Department of Energy as well as the government.
Thank you.
So Mike Michelinas, DOE, just to put a point on the question you had. Our security is aware of it. They have assessed it. There are protocols in place for engagement. And beyond that, I really don't want to comment on anything, but the hazard has been assessed, and there are protocols in place for security to engage a drone that was deemed to pose a threat.
Why tell us about this if you're not going to tell us how you're going to protect us from it?
You asked if the department had assessed the hazard, and my answer was yes, they had. And much like the Department of Defense in a war, we've defined a series of protocols for when the security can engage and what actions they take. Beyond that, the details we won't discuss.
All right. Gil?
Gil Allensworth, CAB. I appreciate everything. This is great information. I think this is a ridiculous conversation. We can't drive on the site. We can't drive up there and get in. But my 12-year-old son, who can play Call of Duty, he doesn't, but he could man a drone and fly over and do something. Why can't, and no one here probably can answer this question, why can't we set something up or have somebody set up saying this is a bad idea to to let people fly drones over Savannah River Site. We've already said it's bad for them to fly over, thank you for sharing, Department of Defense facilities. We know that's bad, but we've not set anything up to say you can't fly a drone over Savannah River Site. And like I said in the committee meeting when we brought this out, we have a person that supports the CAB, comes to very many meetings, and he had FBI knock on his door with 7 people to talk to him about a drone sighting. That was listed, that was put in the paper. And for the CAB, and I thank Nina for writing the recommendation that's been tabled or pulled or whatever, but this happened almost a year ago, and we're still talking about it. This is not a good thing, and as the CAB, and the people I talk to outside that ask me what I do on the CAB, and they ask me about the drone stuff, I don't know what to tell them. But it's been a year since this hit the newspaper, and if you don't remember, people were worried about it. And we're still sitting here debating about it, whether we should have a recommendation or not, which we do have a recommendation of asking for more information. Thank you for coming and giving this report. But what I would like to see, and Nina as chair, and thank you again. I mean, I'm going to keep thanking Nina for writing the recommendation. And Nina, I don't think I'm breaking any confidence. I was mad at her when she pulled it. But we need, common sense says Gil Allensworth can't drive onto the Savannah River Site without an invitation and without going through badging, without going through the proper channels. But I can go get a drone and drive to New Ellington and fly a drone long as I can see it, and it's under 400 feet, and I can go wherever I want on Savannah River Site. Does that make sense to anybody? Or am I the only one? I'm a little passionate about it. I'm done. Bye.
Mr. French.
Tom French for the CAB. I just want to clarify a couple of points. You've had fixed-wing aircraft and propeller drones both over the site?
I'm not exactly sure of what was spotted, all of them. I don't know the details of those reports.
Because they're two very different kinds of things. There's some guy in Aiken that flies a fixed-wing aircraft that's got like an 8-foot wingspan. It's quite large. And he flies it, he can't see it. He flies it for miles. I've seen him downtown and north of town. And that's the kind of thing that you could actually put a payload on of some size. It's a big aircraft. But it's also very slow. I mean, you could see it, spot it, take it down or whatever. The smaller ones are almost impossible to spot because they fly so fast, right? The ones I have seen, the big ones, 55-pound propeller drone. So I don't know how you would ever detect one of those unless it just flew right over somebody's head. Is that true? People actually see these come over?
And that's our reports. Our sightings were from employees on the ground that have thought that they saw whatever it may, and then that's how they initiated the investigation. And then however they recorded that. And again, as far as speculation, I don't know what they actually reported.
Okay. I'm just curious because there's a couple of different kinds of things out there.
Right, and that's one of the things that the FAA is checking. I think I want to say about 2 months ago, they just tried some tests in Dallas with some UAS detection capability equipment that could detect small to large UAS.
Okay.
And I don't know. I'm not an expert to know how that technology works, but again, they're testing it. I'm sure they'll pick something that'll be useful to us. But.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you, Monte, for the presentation. We are going to be bringing the recommendation back in the June committee meeting. And I didn't know if it would be possible for you to attend this committee meeting and maybe answer any questions that people might have about the recommendation so we can get it forward to full board.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So do I understand then that there were 4 confirmed sightings? And if so, is there any sort of public record about that or what was determined or done about that?
The ones that were referred forward, there was enough evidence, whether it would be multiple people saw it, whether there was other photos, and again, I don't know, I'm not on the investigative side, so I don't know exactly what they have, but our protective forces, there was enough evidence for them to say, okay, we believe that this was a UAS, and we need to take it and forward it on to the appropriate authorities for further determination and action on their part if they want to do that.
And who are the appropriate authorities? Is that, I mean, he mentioned something about the FBI. Is that what happened?
FBI would be one of them. You have...
Well, that they went to somebody's house? What was that story? I mean, that was in the paper. I didn't see that. Pardon?
The story was in the Aiken Standard.
Oh, I missed
and
that.
The state, I think the state paper as well.
Well, I guess I asked about this last summer, and I'm just curious. It seems like the United States government has such an extraordinarily sophisticated surveillance apparatus, and it's hard to imagine that, I don't know how big SRS is, is it like 22 miles both ways or something?
310 square miles.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the math, but has there been any discussion on trying to surveil the airspace to be able to keep track of these things? I mean, it seems like the technology would be there. Has that been discussed, or do you know? It seems like it should be. I mean, to know what's going on, because I mean, you use an example of somebody in New Ellington, flying over there as long as it's in sight. Well, what of the people who fly it over there and they don't care that it's not in sight because they do have nefarious intent, and there's no method in place to track them except for the happenstance sighting by an employee that then really can't be confirmed. Anyway, I guess that's a comment more than a question. I think that was everything, but y'all answered everything else. Thank you. Oh, and I didn't give my name, Laura Lance of Aiken.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from around the table? Mr. Hoyle.
No, I was just going to announce our next speaker once Monty's done.
Actually, I've had a request, since we've hit the point where we're going to take a break anyway. Does anyone have any issues with us going ahead and taking that? So we were scheduled for 15. Do you still want that? Okay, let's come back at 2:50, please.
It's funny, we have more. contacted the FBI.
All right, everybody, if we could start looking for our seats. I was going to give you a 2-minute warning, but it got close, so 1 minute, please. If you can start making your way back.
Just to be chair, I mean, you're still.
He's got these pictures up that show courtesy of high flyers. I don't know whether that's a drone or an airplane or what. He opened himself up to inquiries when he does some of his activities would generate
Set the agenda.
interest, I'm sure. I doubt that he was very happy when he got the interest too.
I mean, we got 3 guys running for it. It's not even officially available yet. The guy, Ronnie Young, he's got to win some state election before. I mean, but people, I mean, seat 84, 80, yeah, I mean, because it's actually my district. Yeah, and I love yeah, I understand people, not just Ronnie would do a good job.
Okay, everyone, thank you. Thank you for coming back. Up next, we have Mary Beth Reed and Melissa Jolly is mic'd up as well. They're going to talk to you a little bit about the Cold War historic preservation process. For those of you who are fortunate enough to go on the tour on April 27th, I hope they'll talk a little bit about the curation facility. And I hope you enjoyed that tour. No further ado, ladies.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Beth Reed, and as James just told you, I'm tag team with Melissa Jolly today to talk to you about SRS Cold War historic preservation. Let's get going on here. I have a lot to talk about today. We're here today to tell you what we accomplished in 2016 and give you a roadmap as to what we're going after in 2017. Before I do that, I know there's several new members here, and I want to give you a quick refresher course on what the program's about. Basically, the program is driven by the National Historic Preservation Act, which asks federal agencies to survey and identify the historic resources they steward, and then to use that information to plan projects so they aren't impacted by them to the best of their abilities. Another provision that I don't have up here is that most buildings, sites, districts of that historic resources are considered historic when they reach 50 years of age. Savannah River Site is no different. At the year 2000, Savannah River Site was 50 years of age, and they wanted a history. And they also recognized, DOE recognized, that we needed to look at the buildings that were there and just, talk about the Cold War legacy. What stories did they tell? What was significant? And in doing that, SRS identified a Cold War historic district and also began to collect an artifact collection that began to tell these stories. In 2004, in tandem with our State Historic Preservation Office, the Federal Preservation Officer for Department of Energy, the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation, and local stakeholders, DOE got together with all these folks and said, let's devise an agreement as to how we're going to do this. So our 2004 programmatic agreement has pretty much defined what we do. We identify facilities for preservation, we write histories, we collect and manage artifacts, and we provide public outreach. Now I'm going to get to the part of what did we accomplish for that refresher course in your minds. What did we accomplish in 2016? I'm going to hit 5 areas. Resource identification is a big one. In 2016, we did not find or identify any new resources. All right. But in documentation, we made very solid advances. We finished a large-scale separations thematic study and began one on research and development, looking at the laboratory system at SRS. This is going to be probably my favorite of the 8, I've got to be honest with you. The laboratory system is fascinating. It starts out as a process laboratory, and it grows into a national laboratory. We're really looking forward to this. We have already conducted the oral histories needed for it, and we're starting basic information about the lab and its buildings. That's our next set. And the building was designed by actually a Fifth Avenue architectural firm in the 1950s that was well-renowned for laboratory architecture. So more on that next year, probably. Curation. You're going to hit, those of you who saw Melissa in the curation facility, I know you know how passionate she is about the artifacts. Last year, we accepted 60 new artifacts, and we also scanned over 20,000 original historic photographs to share with the public and to put out there for research purposes. We're very, very proud of this accomplishment, and we have many more thousands to do. Sometimes Melissa tells me what that number is. It is not good. I will be retired and gone by the time that gets going. But hopefully Melissa will be here. And finally, we created a traveling exhibit for the Augusta Public Library that was very well received. Public outreach, we do many things in terms of public outreach. One of the things that Melissa has done a very great job is Throwback Thursdays, getting those historic photographs out to the public. We heard on one of our tours just last week, Melissa had put a picture of a gentleman taking a photograph of a young woman in the 50s in the badge office then, and was the tour goer's father. So we have those great information on him, so we're getting more and more of the stories that make up Savannah Riverside. We displayed small exhibits at the leadership events here at SRNS, hosted 25 tours of the curation facility, all to very different audiences. Some of them, some people like all the little minutiae, other people like the big picture. But there's lots of fun to go there. It's always interesting. And we organized 4 heritage tours and meetings for the preservation community. These are always great. We invite everyone from the preservation community to come together. We talk about what's on our plates and how we can help one another. It's a highly successful part of our program. 2016 compliance. This is, to my mind, the major thrust for 2016. While we each year worry about and take always look at how we can help DOE be compliant with the National Historic Preservation Act. In 2016, we learned that DOE had decided not to preserve C-reactor area, which is a major plank within the programmatic agreement from 2004. All right? So the need to update that agreement and how we're going to do this was on the horizon for us to actually go ahead and get our acts together and figure out what we're going to do about this. So we began to talk about we call the C area consultation, which means you bring the parties together to talk about the cultural resource management update. And DOE advised our PA stakeholders that they wish to return the C area to the decommissioning list. And that began an almost year-long consultation, which we are still part of. We're still working on. Preservation of C area, so you understand, was key to 2 very important planks in the agreement, and that had to do with preservation and public outreach. Okay, they anchored those 2 parts of the agreement. So this change triggered the drafting of a new PA that helps reframe those 2 areas of commitment. And as a result, we sent out an invitation to all the people who were involved in the very first programmatic agreement. Said, let's come together, let's talk, and how do we best reframe DOE's agreement in respect to these areas of concern. This is just a list of the signatories and concurring parties, so you know these are from 2004. You can see it was DOESR and NSA, the Department of Energy's Federal Preservation Officer, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, as well as the South Carolina State Historic Preservation Officer. Invited parties, so we invited, 4, 5, 6, 7. SRS Heritage Foundation, the City of Augusta, and the Aiken County Historical Museum did want to participate. Invited parties that declined to participate were the City of Aiken, New Ellington, the Citizens for Technology Awareness. They had really moved into SRS Heritage Foundation by that point in time, and the CAB, with the idea that we would report to the CAB as we move forward during the process. Monthly meetings were held by phone, face-to-face. Here you see a gentleman from the Advisory Council visiting and the State Historic Preservation Officer as we came together to get a better understanding of what this change meant. What was the scale of taking C-reactor area off the plate? What do we put back on it that's going to work? So we wanted to look at the potential for preserving buildings or structures, that's that preservation plan, that best represent the site's Cold War legacy. Develop feasible public outreach, something SRS can do. That's one thing we heard from the Historic Preservation Officer. Please let us know what's feasible. That's doable then. Then they can see an end to this. And explore opportunities to collaborate with the newly established SRS Museum, an arm of the Aiken County Historical Museum, because this wasn't on our plate in 2004. We're a mature program now, and we have the ability now and the opportunity to work with someone off-site that is interested in SRS history. Potential public outreach avenues. I just want to throw these out here. We are still talking about these things, but I want to give you an idea of what we are talking about. On-site history-based public tours. We are very lucky this year to have Public Affairs reach out to us, talk with us, and we have done 2 history-based tours just within the last month. both of which we think went really well, and even the wildlife cooperated. We had an alligator pop up, like he was on cue during the public tours, as well as wild turkeys. I think that's it. But we were looking for a pig as well, but it didn't happen. But the public tours really did work out very nicely. We went to the town site of Dunbarton. We went to C-reactor area, and then to the curation facility. So it's a full 4 hours, but it was what I think enjoyed by most. We want to increase our Cold War presence on the web. We all have great historic photography. How do we get that out on the web so people can use this, learn about their families, and maybe just learn about Savannah Riverside? We want to create traveling exhibits. The more we do history in the state, we understand that parts of the state don't know what happened here. That really is a truth. And we need to get that information out. We need to do that in terms of exhibits, and can go to the small regional places, as well as some of the larger ones like the State Museum. And finally, we think we need to work with the SRS Museum to help them develop a large permanent exhibit that tells the SRS story. So that would be a really essential avenue. In terms of preservation, we need to identify now the buildings that can tell the story. In administration, reactor operations, separations, as well as safety and security. What facilities can do that, and how do we make that work within an operating facility? Let me put it that way. So we have to think about those things. Artifacts. We are big into artifact conservation. You folks have seen this at our curation facility. But we are looking and thinking, wondering if we can get C-reactor control room out of there and into that curation facility in some way, shape, or form. Put it there and create a marvelous Cold War artifact and assembly. I think people would be really learn a lot from. Our building models, those of you who came, we have building models. Some of them need conservation. These monies could go into doing that. They are small ways, but interesting ways to talk about the buildings that we'd like to preserve that are larger. And finally, the digitization of our photographic and film collections. We've got photos, we've got films. And it's a great collection. We're talking to the other places around the complex to see what they're doing in terms of their preservation, and we're going to see more and more of this sort of thing. So that's where our head at is in terms of where we are right now at the end of 2016 going to 2017. So next year, or this year, let me put it that way, it's funny that it could be this year. We were all talking earlier how it could be May. But we want to complete the update on the Cultural Resource Management Plan. I'm starting at the bottom because it really ties into the fact that, updating that PA is really our major thrust for 2017. We want to assist the SRS Heritage Foundation with the museum startup. They are opening, but we can do more. Host and improve our history-based tours, broaden our heritage tourism participation, complete our R&D study, and we welcome a new staff member to the curation facility, Derek Berry, this year. Hopefully there'll be more. So that's our roadmap for 2017. I kind of gave you the big picture. I know it's a lot of information. I'd be happy to answer any questions. But for right now, I'm going to surrender this to Melissa Johnley. She's going to talk to you about those photographs.
All right. For those of you who toured the curation facility, we didn't really get a chance to talk really in depth about the photography collection that we have. We have the number on here. We really have had to estimate. It's a large collection, but based on what we've already scanned, we think it's probably a collection of about 600,000 photos. So it's a lot of photos. So when she was talking about how long it's going to take to get through all of that, the estimates are a little bit scary. So we've changed our game plan a little bit with how we're scanning now, and went ahead and we were using interns. We've added a full-time staff member to kind of focus on digitizing the collection. And there's still photography on site, so this is really just focusing on 1950 to 1989. And the collections, they have mixtures of employee culture. The series that we're on right now is pretty much all construction, so it's Atomic Energy Commission progress photos from the from 1951 to 1954. Kind of, they would go every couple of months and take pictures of the same building, kind of same angle, that kind of thing, but so you can really see the progress with construction. And then equipment, lots of testing and cost reduction pictures also included. So really what our goals have been with it is to make it more accessible and also preserve it for long-time storage. So part of that has been creating an inventory. At one point there was an inventory that kind of got lost among the shuffle over the years when they had some switches between records and photography and all kinds of things. So There's not a really great inventory right now, so we're really trying to build on that so that when we have topics that people are interested in, or if we need research photography, we can go and find a topic a little bit easier than just having to look through the whole collection. And then also making it more accessible. Mary Beth talked about the website. One of the goals that we're hoping is to be able to share some of the pictures on the website. And then long-term storage. And I'll go ahead. So this is the current storage. It's housed over at the photography building on site. The room is fireproof, but it's not climate controlled. It has air conditioning and that kind of thing, but it's definitely warmer and more humid than what we would like for it to be housed at. And at the curation facility, we're able to provide that part of it. So as we're scanning, we're able to move the collection over to the curation facility. So it's in envelopes. They're in chronological order. So if we know about what year something happened, we can flip through. That's kind of the way the system has been working. So the inventory would really help with that. This is kind of what our archival process has been. You can see the boxes here with the labels on them. So they're in envelopes that we're putting into plastic sleeves. Each negative is going into a paper archival acid-free sleeve so that we can have long-term storage. We're scanning at archival quality so that all the data can be kept. And then as I said, we're putting it into these boxes, again, to help with climate control and kind of creating a microclimate with that. So what we've kind of done so far, we had 4 interns that scanned over 20,000 pictures. The M-Series is actually done now, so this is a very exciting update actually to this slide here. We're done with the M-Series and working on the construction series now. And then Mary Beth mentioned Derek Berry is our recent hire to really focus most of his time on that, and we're able to share those. On Throwback Thursdays is one of the places that we're able to share it right now. Every now and then I'll get research requests where people are looking for a specific building, that kind of thing, that we're able to help them with those requests. And then really the goal, like I said, is to get it where it's available on a website or where people can have access to it. It's really quickly, I know I'm running low on time, but this is one of the pictures that we shared on the Facebook page through Savannah Riversite's page. And I know some of you have already seen this picture before, but these are the David brothers. And the David brothers, they were pipe welders that worked at Savannah Riversite after they had been in The Wizard of Oz. And so they later went on to be welders in Charleston as well. But the thing that I thought was really neat about this picture was when we shared it on the Facebook page, it got over 3,000 likes. I go every week to see how many likes our pictures get. Normally they get about 40. This one got 3,000, and I started reading the comments. And it wasn't just that they had been in The Wizard of Oz. People were excited about that, but it was more than that. We had people who remembered the David brothers and were sharing their stories in the comments on there. And we also had people who were welders, and they were sharing their union number. So it was just really neat to see how this one picture kind of touched a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. So we're hoping that as we can continue to share some of the different pictures, we can continue to kind of share those stories with people in the community and nationally as well. So.
Looks like our first question is going to be from Nina.
Thank you so much. I actually have 2 questions. So the first one about the comments on Facebook, are you able to capture those, and are you preserving
So those are actually through the Savannah Riversite Facebook page. I've gone and printed some of them out on my own just for our records on that. But it's actually Savannah Riversite's Facebook page that is handling all of the posting and all that.
That would be really interesting, if people do put like their union numbers and things, having that. And then the second question I have was on page 7 for slide 13, about the interested parties participating. I saw that the CAB, I guess, declined to participate. I don't know too much about that, and I was wondering if you had any information.
Basically we called and talked to the folks at that time, and the director of the CAB. Is that the correct name? Executive director? Okay. But the idea was at this point in the game, there was more interest in having us come and do yearly updates and let us know where we are in this process. rather than becoming a part of the actual consultation process. And I found the same thing with the city of Aiken, the city of New Allenton. It's time consuming. It is time consuming. There's no two ways around it. But I got the feeling that they felt we were headed in the right direction and said, go forth.
That might be something for us to think about. Thank you.
Larry?
Larry Powell, Cab. Melissa, I was on the tour back in April, and that was my second tour of your facilities, and I thought it was great. I've got more of a statement than a question. You do a great job. All of y'all people do a great job in your work there. I just feel like it's a big shame that your building isn't in a less secure area, so that people from the public could just, on a whim, on a Saturday afternoon, come down and walk in and tour the facility. I mean, it's pretty obvious that there's not a security threat there at all. And I can see me, when my children were small, taking a Saturday afternoon and going through the facility. And I just think it'd be great if you could move to the periphery of the plant, or somewhere that's not so secure. Excuse me, so secure, and give the public better access. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you remember, one of the things that I asked you on the bus was, what are the next steps going to be for the Historic Preservation Program? I want you to be thinking about that. And I hope you thought about that as you were listening to the presentation, and maybe that's something that you might want to communicate to the department about, is your concerns about access. That may be a place that you want to go. Mr. Malik, I think I see your card up.
Narendra Malik, Cab. Thank you for the tour which was given in March. My question is, I did not see any agriculture abandoned equipment collected from the site and put in the museum. I have seen a couple of abandoned equipment in the area. I think it will be nice to have them brought into the museum and stored there.
Yes, sir, and that's our intention. We feel like that, and just not the SRS Heritage Museum, but there could be other places that we could loan objects to that have the credentials, okay? Because they have to have insurance. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. And Melissa's the guru on that. I have no idea. We agree, and you're going to see more and more. Right now, the SRS Museum is getting established. They had to have fire suppression placed in. There's a lot of things that they have to do to establish them as a museum, and they're working diligently on that. And when they hit that point, then we're ready to go. Let me put it that way.
I can provide you the pinpoint position of those abandoned equipment in the area.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Yes.
Rose Elliott, Cab. I heard you say that you had a traveling exhibit that went to the Augusta Museum.
We did have at the Augusta Library, now I can't remember, it was, I guess, the end of last year, the beginning of this year it came down. It was there for, I think, 2 to 3 months, and it was actually SRS comes to town. It was about Augusta and the surrounding area, and kind of how people worked and lived and played in Savannah River site, or in Augusta, with the coming of this site coming into the area.
No, I was just wondering if you had it available for loan to some of the smaller counties that have been impacted, particularly from employment and being downriver from the site. Just know our little county museum would probably be all over something like that.
That would be great. And that was actually the first loan exhibit that I've done. I've been on site for about 4 years now. And so that was my first opportunity to do that. And so that's definitely something that we've been talking about, how to get more outreach out into the community. So that's great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Andrew Albanese. I'm with Savannah River Nuclear Solutions on the Cold War program. I just wanted to address the curation comment about public access. And a big focus for us right now, which was mentioned by Mary Beth, is is the museum is just in a startup mode, but our intention is, the reason for being for the curation facility is indeed to do more and more public outreach. So we're in our infancy right now. We're just in the crawling mode, if you will, towards hooking up and linking up with the SRS museum, as well as other museums in the area and across the state. But that is our intent, is to get much more robust, to get some of those artifacts out into and tell the story. Okay.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions? Thank you, ladies. Thank you. So, David, where should we go from here?
Okay, we got a couple of draft recommendations that we'd like to introduce to you. The first one has to do with the SRS strategic plan, which was drafted, and the recommendation manager is David Vovakis. David's only been on the CAB 3 months, and he's already got a recommendation to propose to you. So, David, would you give us a rundown of what that is?
So we move from just looking back at the past to looking toward the future. Back in FY11, this is Dave Vovakis, CAB. Back in FY11, fiscal year 11, DOE did a nice job of preparing a 4-year SRS strategic plan. That plan is no longer current, so we're asking that DOE update its strategic plan to mesh with the Department of Energy strategic plan, and also to present a draft of the plan that the CAB, so that the CAB can be given an opportunity to offer comments and provide input. And this is consistent with what the relationship between DOE and the CAB back several years ago on 2 different occasions.
Okay, does anyone have any comments or suggestions with regard to this draft recommendation?
I don't see anything from the CAB members, but we do have a member of the public. Marilyn?
Marilyn Parson, Bluffton, South Carolina. I just had a question on recommendation number 2. It says present a draft of that plan so that the CAB can have an opportunity to offer comments and provide input. Is your intent this would be before a draft goes out for public comment? Because I believe when the strategic plans are written that they do go out for public comment. So is your intent that this would be before that? Well, I can ask DOE. I believe that's true. A strategic plan does go out for public comment, does it not? I believe when I had looked at the one that is the current one, that I believe that it did go out for public, well, I believe it did go out for public comment, right?
Zach Todd, DOE. As you recall, I think this process started about a year and a half ago that we started drafting the new strategic plan for Savannah River site. And at that time, we agreed to allow the CAB and really the public a comment period on the strategic plan. As you also may know, it hasn't been released for public comments yet. It's been at headquarters now for probably, I think, I want to say close to 5-6 months, just kind of pending a EM1 designated replacement, and then at that point, they will offer their guidance and any adjustments necessary, and then we'll kind of move forward with that original plan.
Dave Vovakis, CAB. Yeah, that sounds acceptable.
All right, so what is the answer to my, what's the answer to my question?
At the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more comments from the board, especially about this recommendation?
Okay, then, not hearing any, the committee has recommended or proposed to put this recommendation to the full board for a vote tomorrow.
Sounds like a plan.
Our next draft recommendation has to do with prescribed fire. The recommendation manager is Nina Spinelli. Nina, could you tell us about it?
Sure, Nina Spinelli, CAB. This one's pretty simple. The background just goes into the effects of smoke for people in the general public, and what the Forest Service suggests for prescribed burns for people who are especially susceptible to smoke. And the focus is really just on the recommendations, and I understand that it can be a challenge with the weather and burns, but one, work with the Forest Service to create a calendar of prescribed burn days that can be shared on social media and the SRS website to alert residents of potential smoke. And then second, work with the Forest Service to distribute a calendar of these prescribed burn days at local community events, including at SRS CAB meetings. Does anyone have any thoughts or feedback on it?
Dan's a fan.
I bet he is. Good.
loves
Well, if no one's good with it, and y'all are there's someone up there. It's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I thought there'd be a lot of discussion, so I was sitting down.
We had a lot of discussion at the committee meeting, so this is
okay.
nice. This is good. Don't bring that up.
Okay. Well, I'm wondering, does SRS, is part of the prescribed burning program, is that also part of a timbering program? Is there any timber for sale?
I think it's all done through the U.S. Forest Service that is housed, I believe, at SRS, because that's where our presentation, when we had it at our last full board meeting in January, it was the Forest Service that came and spoke at our CAB meeting, and I do believe timbering is part of what falls under their purview.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess as somebody who has family members who are profoundly affected by smoke, and prescribed burning being part of the timbering industry, particularly in recent years, we have a lot of agricultural burning and forestry burning throughout the state. So while Farmer A may be doing it on a good burn day, maybe Farmer B isn't, and then there's the cumulative effects of the smoke. I'm getting to a point with this. For instance, I know for a fact that the SRS burns, even though they do it on the optimum days, and I've discussed with them numerous times the conditions they use and all that, and I refer to the website. But nonetheless, you can't always predict, and particularly in these times, what the weather is going to do. And so I've heard tales of the UPS drivers. They're sort of the canaries in the coal mine because they're all over the roads, and they go back to headquarters profoundly sickened in the springtime, day after day after day. And so also here in Aiken, it's hard to say, well, the haze and the smoke, because you drive down Whiskey Road in Aiken on these days, and it's roughly from January through April that these prescribed burns take place. And you drive down, just say Whiskey Road, and I don't think people really notice, but the sky isn't clear anymore. Everything, there's this haze over the air, and where did the haze come from? I mean, it really takes weeks for these particulate matter to, settle down, dissipate. Here I come to my point. There's not really, I realize that DHEC has the monitoring system. They have the Trenton and I guess Jackson and Trenton, and there's something over in Georgia. But there's not a real-time monitoring system in place of any kind to tell us what we're being exposed to. And I realize this is a forestry service concern, but Savannah River Site does contribute a lot of the prescribed burning to this area. And it seems like we deserve to know here in Aiken what we're breathing in real time. School children, if there are these recommendations to go out, for people to spend time indoors and keep the air systems on recirculate. I don't think the school systems are set up for that. They don't have an air monitoring system to say, oh, this is a bad day, the kids shouldn't go out on the playground. It's really kind of a large issue that has not been addressed from the standpoint of human health. And so as long as it's being discussed, I really would like, as a citizen, I would like to see the human health aspects of this. It's not enough to say, well, from a meteorological standpoint, the conditions are perfect. But yet, if we have this haze in the air, it doesn't really matter who's delivering that haze. We have children, we have senior citizens, people with health conditions who are being sickened by it. So that would be my point.
Well, thank you for that. I'm hoping that by having that alert to residents, they'll be able to take those next steps and figure out what they need to do for themselves. And I think that would be a decision that would be made at the local level, at schools, at what they choose to do during those times. And, each individual would be able to make that decision. I think the goal of this recommendation is, from what I've heard, the information is kind of haphazardly given out. Some people get text messages, some people get alerts, some people know who to call and who to check in with. And what I'd like to see, and maybe we could be a little bit more clear with recommendation number 1, is a systematic approach to making sure that people who may be affected by this have that information. So maybe a text message that goes out, or maybe an email to schools or to people who choose to get on this list to say, this is what's happening, and if you need more information, more details than we're going to provide in this quick update, here's how you can reach us. So that might be something for us to maybe look at for number 1, if we can add, create a phone tree system where people can be alerted.
Do you want to specify it, or do you want to maybe make it
Yes.
systematize the notification system?
Thank you. Use that word. So
Yeah,
create a notification system for individuals. Hurry, I'm going to forget what I'm thinking. For individuals, businesses, and schools?
Yeah. Or how about local government?
Local government, thank you.
Okay. The school aspect, there's not, they don't really have anybody on staff that is knowledgeable about air quality issues, say, and I think it's something, there's kind of, this organization is doing this and this is doing this, and I would like to see sort of an interfacing on the notification. I will say that this spring, when I consulted the Forest Service site, their site was not able to reveal the information about where they were burning on any given day, and I contacted them, and they said they were working on the system, but it wasn't compatible with some, but anyway, but yeah, if it were to say schools, I mean, if the schools could, because kids are basically, I mean, they're in their desk for the day. That's where they stay, and it doesn't matter what the adults have decided to do, there they are, and they have these really bad conditions. But anyway, thank you very much.
Susan, did you want to add something to it? And then
Susan Corbett, Cab, I just wanted to know, I mean, is this smoke tested for radiation releases? Is it monitored for that? Is it periodically tested? Or not? Is that not being
that
tested?
is past my knowledge point, Susan. I think that would be a Mike or Terry question.
Terry Spears, DOE. Not that I'm aware of, Susan. These are prescribed burns of undergrowth within the forested areas, but I don't believe we do test the emissions, so to speak, for any kind of contaminants, radioactive or otherwise.
Mike McLean's DOE, I can expand a little bit. There are hazard analyses, though, that are done where they calculate what the likely doses are. The Forest Service has done that. They use the data that we have on the site for any contamination in the area.
So where can we find those doses, those amounts?
You'd have, the Forest Service discussed that when they made their presentation. I recall that from a slide they put up on the screen, but beyond that, I don't know.
Okay.
John.
Yes, John McMichael, CAB. Nina, you've done a good job of outlining the communication aspect of it, but if you're going to do this, I think you need to take it a little step further. Most of your communication media out there, the television, radio stations, things like that, will incorporate information like this in their weather forecast if they had it, and if you talk to them about doing so. So that's a suggestion. And also, I think you need to add all the health institutes, the hospitals and things like that, because many people that are in the hospital are in there for respiratory issues. So making them aware of it would also be another aspect of it. So.
Thank you. Can we do after businesses, hospitals, schools, hospitals, and the media?
Yep.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else have any
Mr.
questions?
Malik.
Narendra Malik, CAB. I think there is some system for radiation monitoring. There are some TLD badges placed all over the site, so if there is any radiation leak from the burning, it will detect. That's my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. Laura, did you have another question? No, you're fine.
On? Oh. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to give my name, Laura Lance, Aiken, South Carolina. I still think, I mean, this is probably beyond the jurisdiction of this, but I still think really, I don't see how people can put particulate matter in the air, which potentially does have radioactive materials. And then also, I mean, the plant does has a lot of other emissions like styrene. I mean, there are a lot of other emissions that the plant has. These things are all then becoming airborne with this. And it just seems like there should be some kind of monitoring system. And I sort of realistically understand why in Aiken there's really never been any real-time monitoring, I don't think, where we can know what, you know. But it seems like when these burns are going on, that there should be some sort of monitoring. I just don't know why that isn't done.
Sure. Well, I know that that's probably, you're right, past what we can do in a recommendation, but I am going to take a note and see if that's something that maybe we can get a presentation on, or an update, and add that towards like our work plan, if that works.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
No problem.
Shelley.
Yes, this is Shelley Wilson from DHEC, and I just wanted to clarify. I think maybe you're talking about a very close time monitoring of specific events, but just wanted to clarify that of course DHEC has an ambient air monitoring system across the state, whereby we monitor the air over time. And South Carolina is currently in attainment with all of the national air standards for air monitoring. So then in addition to that, we do have the environmental oversight program where we independently do environmental monitoring, and air is one of those pathways. And so we actually have some copies of the report that we do every year that you can take with you today on a CD. So there's a lot of monitoring that is ongoing. I just wanted to make sure that's clear to everybody. I think that perhaps you're thinking of if there's a prescribed burn, is there some monitoring during that instance? And no, we can't move the monitors around for each prescribed burn during the state. But again, that system is there to capture the overall trend and the overall status of air in the state. Again, we are currently in attainment. And for these specific prescribed burns, I think that this recommendation is right on the money in terms of if there's a specific event, then it is a local decision to notify and communicate to perhaps parts of a society that are more susceptible, and that's a local decision, so that this is a great recommendation.
All right. Did you have one more comment that you wanted to
Yeah. Actually, I think the Jackson monitor's been, maybe it's been turned back on, but it's been turned off for some time. And again, I realize that gives the trends of what the air monitoring is doing, but it doesn't tell us what a child at East Aiken Elementary or a child over in New Ellington is breathing in at that particular minute. And it seems like children are so incredibly vulnerable to these emissions and the particulate matter, and there should be, I mean, if there are going to be these burns, and maybe there should be air monitors on each school. Yes, it's expensive, but either we don't do the burns or we do the responsible thing and find out in real time, not in trends or models, what the kids are breathing in. And as far as these monitors go, I mean, I forget what they're measuring, like say the Trenton, what that measures, what?
So for burns, it would be a particulate matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, we do have an existing system that is up and running for the whole state, and the monitors are strategically placed to get all the right positions to give an overall good picture of what the air is like and the trends for that area. So certainly, if it is true that there are certain segments of the population that are more vulnerable. Again, our system is aimed at protection according to federal standards, which really aims at the general population. So there are some choices that perhaps local schools can make if they want to set up monitoring of their own. They certainly can do that and elect to do that. So those are all local choices. But we do have the active system overall for the state.
Okay, thank you.
Another look at air monitoring at some point, maybe build this in a little bit later. How do we feel about this recommendation about the notification system for prescribed burns itself? Let's take a look at what this is. Yes?
Dan Kaminsky Camp. I think the recommendation is basically to inform the public when these burns are going to take place. It's in the public's best interest to have prescribed burns, because otherwise the detrimental effects of a mass fire, you just need to go down to Florida and see what that looks like recently.
Sure.
So this heads off a lot bigger troubles than we give it credit for, because it's taking it in small doses instead of burning down the whole place at once.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things I was thinking about, actually, as Laura was talking, with this STEM outreach, is the new push for citizen scientists. And as STEM is going more and more into the schools, seeing how schools would be willing to buy into having that air monitoring system and actually having the students participate in it. So that could be something maybe we think about in the future. Gil?
So for this recommendation,
Yes.
how do we feel? Oh,
Hope we're good.
I think we need to be careful. Gil Hounsworth Cab, we need to be careful. I mean, that's a school board. I think that's something you take to the school board and Dr. Alford and not here.
All right, so David?
Well, I want to thank everybody for their feedback on both of these recommendations. I think it was a very useful dialogue. I think we are prepared to press forward with both of these recommendations tomorrow for a vote by the full board.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
The Strategic and Legacy Management Committee will have their next meeting on Wednesday, June 13th at 4:30 p.m. to 6:20 p.m. in the DOE Meeting Center at 230 Village Green Boulevard, Suite 220 in Aiken. See you there.
All right, before we move on to you, Gil, Nina had something that she wanted to do real briefly.
Don't judge.
I don't believe my
Don't. Just come get that. So as many of you know, Jim Giusti is going to be retiring in like 72 hours. And Jim has been, I think, part of the cab ever since I've been here. And he's always been really responsive and supportive of us as a group. So I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you, Jim, for everything you've done for us and enjoying your retirement. And there is a card floating around. So if anyone has the card and wants to stand up and give Jim the card, yay! Give Jim the card, Jim, if you want to come up. Is Jim here? Am I talking to no one? All right. I don't. Thank you. Well, Dan gets to get up and give him the card. You had it.
No, you
You're
the chair.
Get up there. I have not brushed my hair. I probably have a donut still on me.
Jim, you can retire after she brushes her hair.
Let me brush my hair first, please. What? You don't want to say anything?
I have nothing to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Nina. All right, Gil, are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go.
Oh, thank you, Nina. Good afternoon. Welcome to Augusta, Georgia. We're going to be here a while, so buckle up. No, we're not. I do want to make a note. David, thank you for talking about June 13th and the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee. I just want to remind everybody for the other committee meeting, it will be Kathy's birthday. And if you go to the June 13th meetings, make sure you take a present for Kathy. She'll appreciate it. A little housekeeping. We got a cab copy of the 2017 SRS cab members. If anybody wants to know, I'm not going to say it publicly, but that is not my cell phone number. So if you try to reach me at that, it won't work. If you want it, come talk to me, but I don't want everybody on YouTube to know what my cell phone number is. You already have it. You don't? I'll give it to you afterwards. April 27th, I mean, Narinder already mentioned about the tour. I know there's been a couple conversations and mentions of the cab tour. I wanted to thank everyone who put that together. As I'm just sitting here across from Larry, and Larry, we got to tour the facility and learn about all the history and everything we're doing there. But one of the things that really stood out to me is we've been talking about since February the Defense Waste Processing Facility melter change out. Just to give you an idea, it's a 75-ton, 1-inch thick carbon steel storage box that we put that they're putting the melter into. And that sounds great and that sounds impressive, but until you see this, you don't understand the enormity of the project. So we can sit here in a boardroom and talk about 75 tons and 1-inch steel carbon, but until you actually get out there and realize what we're talking about, it's an amazing thing. And with that April 27th tour, it's not only the actual physical part of it, but we got the opportunity to sit in the project management room where we can see all the project management and to see the level of detail, the level of engagement of a team. I don't even remember how big the team is, but the detail and everything it's going into, it's an immense undertaking. So I just want to thank everyone who allowed us to go out there and facilitated that and really gave us a view into something that doesn't happen very much. It's been there, that melter was in fact 13 or 14 years and was expected to last 2. So thank you. I do want to recognize the members of the committee. I want to thank Dan Comiskey to be the vice chair, Susan Corbett for being on the committee, David Hoyle, Jim Lyon, Narinder Malik. Is it Malik? Okay, Malik. Earl Shepard, Nina Spidelli, and Bobby Williams. We do appreciate everything you do on the committee, and the questions that are raised at committee meetings are phenomenal. Now, we do have some open recommendations. We have an open recommendation 336, waste management milestones, 339, liquid waste revision, and also recommendation 340, commend the originators of the double stacking idea. As we were in committee last month, we are going to keep 336 open for some more discussion, and we will bring that back to the full board at the proper time. We did vote to close 339, bring it to the full board to have it thought about for a close, and we will be doing that tomorrow. And my notes were not complete. I apologize for that. What, do we have anything on 340? Are we closing that committee? Okay, thank you, David. We will be voting tomorrow on whether or not to close 340. We do have a presentation today from Bill Barnes. Bill, are you ready? All right, thanks a lot. And we'll give it away to Bill.
Where do I point it to? Okay. Okay, good afternoon. I'm Bill Barnes. I'm with Savannah River Remediation. Here today to talk about some work going on with our 3H evaporator. And I am your late afternoon entertainment. So we're gonna wrap this up with some excitement, hopefully. So the purpose is, as I mentioned, to provide an update on where we are for the 3H evaporator and the status of ongoing repairs. 3H evaporator is in H Tank Farm on the site. It's our largest evaporator on site. And it's got a key role in our mission, and I'll get into some of that here shortly. Mentioned largest evaporator on site. It can create well over 1 million gallons of tank space in a year. It's been a key part of our sludge batch preparations in our system plan. Essentially, the evaporator is a big boiler, boils off water to attain that space gain. It began operation in 2000, and in February of 2016, it reached end of life, which was unexpected because it had a 30-year design life. As a result, we have no spare 3H evaporator on site because all the planning had expected the 30-year design life. And I'll get into how we identified it, but the leak was identified at the very bottom of the cone of the evaporator. So this is a story of the work that's gone in to date to identify the leak and where we're heading. Next slide. Where do I point? Yeah, okay. All right, so identification of the leak site. Well, first of all, just to give you a concept of size, this is the original evaporator before we installed it. It's about 27, 28 feet tall, 14 foot in diameter, has an operating volume of 10,000 gallons. You know, about what your swimming pool at home holds. Before it got installed, the evaporator was insulated, and then stainless steel sheet metal was put around it, encapsulating it, okay? And here's a picture of the evaporator installed in the cell, okay? So again, it's 27 foot tall, cell's quite deep. The cell it's in is stainless steel containment, shielded, so it's secondary containment, and okay, so we went about figuring out, okay, how are we going to determine where the leak is on this evaporator? To do so, we realized we're going to have to take that stainless steel lagging or sheet metal off the outside, remove the insulation so we can see the walls of the evaporator itself. It's very high dose radioactively, so we knew we were going to have to utilize robotics. So we picked out a couple robots. This is called the Brock, and this picture just shows a number of the different attachments you can put on the Brock. We mounted on top of the Brock, which is yellow here, a robot called the Kuka to do a lot of the precise work. I showed you the cell picture earlier. We lowered those robots down into the cell. You can put a lot of different tools on the end of the robot. You can put plasma arc, you can put cutting tools, you can put lances. So we lowered it down. We first went about using robotics to cut the sheet metal off and remove the insulation. So here's a picture of a big portion of that sheet metal and insulation removed to expose the outside of the evaporator itself. Again, different tools we used ice blasting, carbon CO2 blasting to clean the outside, spray wands. And then we've identified at the very bottom, as I mentioned, this is with all the sheet metal and insulation removed, at the very bottom of that cone, identified the leak site. And you can see it in this picture here. Okay, so what caused it? We attached to the robots ultrasonic instruments and went down and measured the wall thickness down at the leak site and all over the evaporator. So we identified that we had good wall per spec wall thickness everywhere except that very bottom cone, and determined that the leak was caused by erosion. There's a steam lance that goes into the bottom of the pot that blows steam to mix up any solids that are in the pot. Almost like, you know, if you take a straw, put it at the bottom of a soda cup and you blow, okay, but it's steam. Over the 16 years, that lance, based on the design, using steam to blow those solids caused erosion at the very bottom. That lined up pretty much exactly where we saw the thinning of the walls. So we, next, for the repair, we deployed some good technology where it's 3D laser mapping metrology, where we lowered a laser down into the cell, and it maps out. We had to take pictures, 360 precise measurements of the evaporator itself, as well as the entire structure, so that we could have exact measurements on the repair patch that we needed to put into place. So we did the 3D laser mapping. From this is the whole program, but you can measure down to very precise some results of that mapping. If you were able to look, the engineers, where you don't have straight lines, it indicates anomalies. You know, we found, of course, the bottom of the evaporator wasn't perfectly round, which was helpful in designing the bottom patch. Essentially, it's going to be a cap that goes over the bottom of the evaporator. So we are going to, we have a procurement in place for a hot press cone to cap to go over the bottom. We have a ring that attaches to that cone, which will actually mate up with the evaporator itself. So the ring will be welded to the evaporator. We we're in the process of designing and procuring. We have a separate robot we're going to use to do the welding, because the welding with a robot in a remote location, you have to have a lot of stability. So we selected a robot that put it on one side, you can go more than 180 degrees, put it on the other side, more than 180 degrees. So we had tested a lot of different welding methods to see what would be best in this application, and we landed on something that looks like it'll work real well. It's called powder injection laser welding. Essentially, outside on the cell cover, you'd have a hopper of Hastelloy powder, which gets conveyed through a hose down to the robot, which is holding the end effector for the laser. And you can do multiple passes with that. We've done that mocked up using robots, and it's worked quite well. Of course, this is about a 250-pound cap. How do we get it cinched up under there to do the weld? We have a design on basically you can say a hydraulic lift that we'll place underneath the bottom of the evaporator, lift it up, and again, we'll have match marks to match up the actual geometry with what we've machined to match that geometry, any flat spots or any anomalies. In parallel, because this has never been done, and we are using state-of-the-art robotics, primarily because, you know, it's, like I said, a high radiation dose field, and we want to minimize worker exposure. It's technically challenging, operationally complex, but due to the importance in the system plan, we have been down the path of, we've gotten quotes from and proposals for a replacement evaporator. We have kicked off the design of a new evaporator pot. I mentioned the slide, leak site identification, either the path of repairing the evaporator or procuring a new evaporator. We needed to do this. We needed to find out where the leak was so that we could determine, even if we were going to replace it, what needed to change in the design, since it only lasted half of its expected life. So it's really been an exciting project so far. We got a lot of young engineers that are really learning a lot about robots, and it's going well. Low exposure, making good progress, and during this calendar year, we expect to have it repaired and the 3H operational. Worst case, if for some reason we run into a problem, we have that parallel path of a replacement evaporator. So before I get into questions, I have a little video that I'm going to show. It's only a minute or two. I'll try to point things out as we go. Do you have the video? Okay. Okay. So we did mock-ups. This is the robot with the cutting tool, cutting the stainless steel sheet metal off from several views. We have lowering the robot down into the evaporator cell. You can see it's a very tight fit, not a lot of room to maneuver. So that's been quite challenging. Then once it gets to the floor, the base robot's able to drive on tracks to move around the cell. Okay, what do we have here? Again, this is in cell, some additional cuts of cutting off that sheet metal and removing insulation. So it worked quite well. You can actually program, because you know, if you think of a conical shape, you have to program it to stay with that shape. Okay, this is the bottom of the evaporator itself. That's the leak site I mentioned at the very bottom of that cone area. So our cap is going to be, if you look here, right at the bottom of the evaporator. We've had red dye we put into the evaporator so that when we heated it up and it started to leak, we could see it more readily. So you might see a reddish tint there. Okay, over here, okay, this is the ice blasting, CO2 blasting that we deployed to go down and rather than sandblast, ice blast, so we didn't have the waste or the water. That did a good job of cleaning. Here, down on the bottom right, is ultrasonic tool on the end of the robot taking those measurements I mentioned. And again, this is all operated, folks sitting outside the building about 100 feet away in a command trailer using joysticks and cameras to operate this equipment. Here, this little robot is robots we've used in the tank closure process. So it could ride under the rails. We used it primarily for cleanup. We had to clean the area underneath the evaporator pot to get ready for welding. So that was quite useful. You can see it created quite a mess there. So this small robot helped us get that area clean. And I believe that's it. So, yeah, the last slide was questions. So,
So I saw a number of cards.
Sure.
First one I saw was Susan's.
Thank you. Susan Corbett, CAB. I have a couple questions here. First of all, who made the evaporator? What's the company that made it? Is this an American made or is this made in a foreign country?
yeah, I believe that, and I'm not 100% sure, but just thinking back to some drawings, I think it was Joseph Oates Corporation, which is American.
How do you spell that? Just like it sounds, AOT?
OATES.
Okay, and they make heavy equipment like this in general? It's kind of their thing?
They make vessels and heavy equipment.
So going back to the evaporation process a little bit, so this boils off water to reduce the inventory in the tank. Now, is that water collected?
Yes, so the water's boiled off.
As steam? And it condenses somewhere?
It goes through a demister, condenser, condenses, which knocks the majority of the particles out, and then that, which we call overheads, goes to the effluent treatment plant and is processed and released.
Okay, so how long did this thing leak before it was detected, and how much leaked out?
Yeah, I don't know the exact time frame, how long before it was detected. About 3,000 gallons leaked out, and again, it leaked into the secondary containment. And then, so what happened next, and so this took some time, is to empty the evaporator, and then we moved the contents in that secondary containment back into a waste tank. So we have a way to, to get it out of the cell and put it back into a waste tank.
And this is, so this was liquid waste, so this was high-level with pretty much every radionuclide you can imagine in there?
Yes.
And was it gamma radiation is what we're worried about for the exposure, right?
Yes.
Okay, just a couple more real quick here. Any chance of getting our money back for that product from the company since it didn't live up to its lifespan? It has a warranty on it, maybe?
I don't think so, but we'll certainly ask that question. Yeah.
Let me see. And where do the little robots go after they've been contaminated?
Well, the robots, we have a couple choices. We can decontaminate them as best we can, and then wrap them up, seal them, make sure they won't release any contamination, and save them for a future project, or if just based on cost benefit, they could be disposed of.
Are they disposed of on site at SRS?
Yes, it depends on what they're classified as waste and where their final resting point will be. We lost one of the little robots I showed you. It's fairly inexpensive. That will probably be disposed of. The robot combination, the Brock and the Kuka, more expensive, and we're looking at now how can we perhaps apply that technology to tank closures, so that may be something we save. We did advance the industry a little bit. We found one of the challenges was the radiation field was so high, and the robotic arm had electronics in its arm itself, so it would be affected by the radiation, and we'd have to pull and do repairs. So we worked with a robotics company for the welding robotic arm. They're changing their design. They're going to move those electronics out into a clean area, so it can handle a higher dose rate. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lyons? I don't envy you. I have 4 questions. You may have answered one, but I didn't hear it. Are you able to assess condition of other components, external and internal, in this evaporator at this time?
Is your question specific to components related to the evaporator?
Yes, other than the failing, the part that's failing.
Yes, we've done on this evaporator stress analysis to identify where the most likely high stress areas would be. As I mentioned, when we uncovered the vessel itself, we took ultrasonic measurements to assess the integrity of the walls, and we've done hydro tests of the tube bundles itself. That's our check to make sure the integrity of the tube bundles. And there's a periodic internal inspection of the vessel that's required.
I take it you've been able to identify the cause of this failure.
That is
materials failure in this case, I gather. And the materials you would replace that particular component with, this cap, would be not prone to the same failure.
Right.
Would, yes, no, maybe, we don't know.
Yeah, that's certainly something we're going to take into account either way. The other evaporators on site are all a third of the size. None of them have ever failed as far as the breach in the vessel. It's always been at the tube bundles. When this was designed, they scaled everything up by 3. So this lance, this straw I mentioned, it's got 3 times the velocity, and the velocity is what really causes the erosion. So it's one area. How far from the bottom it is, we might change. We're looking at how often we should lance, because currently we lance all the time. We're certainly going to probably scale back on that. And we're also looking at the thickness of the bottom to make sure, that may be something we have to beef up.
If the repair option is selected rather than the replace, Do you anticipate that the lifespan of this evaporator will extend to the original 30 years or even beyond?
The repair option looks like it will last us 15 additional years, which, in me looking at it, is well beyond what the system plan requires the 3H evaporator to operate.
So it may be very cost effective to do all this.
It is. The repair is certainly much more cost effective than a replacement.
Okay, and the disposition, the spilled materials, you may have already answered that, I'm not sure.
Yes, so when the leak occurred, nothing went to the environment.
I understand,
Yeah.
it's in a catchment.
It's in a catchment. We jetted, or we used to jet.
It's
instead of a
going
pump.
through a process.
And it goes to
Okay.
a waste tank, so we've cleaned the cell, so that's all taken care of.
All right, just for the record, and in my experience, y'all are doing exactly what you have to do. And I think you're probably doing a pretty good job at it. I'm just really, this is quite remarkable, I think.
It is.
Thank you.
It is, thank you. Yeah, the team has really done some first-of-a-kind achievements here.
Narendra Malik, CAB. Bill, I have my question about threefold. First is, what's the probability of getting this welding done that it does not leak? And number two, if you have to replace it with alternate pot, what's the cost involved and how big that is going to be, and what will happen to this failed equipment, where it will be stored?
Right, okay, so first question was, what's the probability of success of the repair?
Yes.
Yeah, and so, I'm personally very confident we're going to go through a well qualification, a quarter section mock-up, a full-scale mock-up, and then we're going to deploy it to the field. Bill Barnes's estimate would be we've got a 95% chance, okay? But you ask different people, you could get different answers. As far as cost, as I mentioned, what we've done mostly up to now, taking the stainless steel off and the insulation, identifying the leak site, and assessing why it failed. That was required for either the repair or the replace option. So what we're looking at is to go from here to repair it about 1.9 million versus a replacement. And again, this is my estimate, 10 to 14 million. So it's a fraction of the cost. Now, your third question dealt with storage. I believe we would be able to, we would de-inventory the failed evaporator if we end up replacing it. And we think we'd have a, disposal path for it. So it wouldn't be like the melter where it'd stay on site until we figure that out. We would have a disposal path with a disposal box where it would go off to, I don't know if that's Nevada or where.
If I may continue, there is one evaporator in F-tank form which is abandoned on site. Is it going to be like that?
Is it what?
There's one evaporator in F-tank form that has been abandoned on site.
Yes.
So this melter, if we are not going to use it, is it going to be abandoned on site or is it going to be replaced and moved somewhere else?
The one in F-tank form?
No.
This one?
3H evaporator.
3H, if we wouldn't abandon it, we would pull the existing 3H evaporator pot completely out, put a new pot in, reconnect everything, and then dispose of the old. So it would be a part replacement, a big part though.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Dan Kaminsky, Cab. You answered the question, so 100% containment, no problems?
That's
there,
correct.
Okay. When you did the ultrasonic testing, was there any other degradation of the material further up, or is that cap going to encompass all the erosion?
Yeah, that's a good question. All of our wall thinning was just at the bottom of that cone.
Just where the lance
in
was
the area of the lance. And we took measurements all the way up, and not too far, just a few inches up, we went back to the original wall thickness, ½ inch. And then, so we're going to encompass all of that, and we'll have
great.
good wall thickness.
And when this equipment was designed and fabricated, was there a failure modes effect analysis and FMEA done?
I believe so, yes.
Did anyone dust off these records to see where they might have missed a few things, because steam lancing is inherently erosive? So I'm just kind of shocked that anyone's surprised that this failed in this manner.
Right, that's certainly, there's some lessons learned there that we intend to
You could at least
capture.
ask for the design feedback.
Yeah, the design feedback, and there's more to it. We'll definitely capture those lessons learned. What it looks like to me is everything was from the other evaporators 3x, so everything is 3 times the size, 3 times the steam, and they went 3 times the steam, and perhaps that factor of erosion.
I'm sure there's
wasn't
smarter
looked at.
people in this room that would know you can't do that on a whole lot of
Right.
dynamic things.
So this
in
is
the
just
lab.
me hypothesizing what they went through 16 years ago or 18 years ago when they designed it, but that's certainly something for going forward. We want to capture what should have happened that didn't in the original design.
Okay, thank you. Great presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, real quick, let's finish up with Bob.
Robert Smith, Cab. Just point of clarification. If I understood your presentation correctly, you're not cutting away the existing cone bottom. You're going to do an overlayment and weld the cone on that. So you're, in essence, going to end up with a much thicker cone, if you will, with a sort of a sacrificial layer in between.
Yeah, that's correct. We're going to have a cap that goes from here to here, and just at that ring is where it's going to be welded. So we're going to put a new bottom on, okay? So we can't guarantee there's not going to be any space. So we're going to actually make a hole here and here so that the new bottom communicates, so we're going to have pockets that expand, that type of thing.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anything else for the Waste Management Committee?
No, that's all for the Waste Management Committee. Just invite you out to the committee meeting on June 6th. Thank you much.
Thank you. All right. Up next, we're going to do the EMSS AB chairs recommendations. Nina, will you get us started?
Yeah, so I'm going to start it, and Earl is going to wrap this up for us because he's Earl. For those of you who are newer to the CAB, and as a reminder for me, twice a year, the chairs of all of the 8 site-specific advisory boards get together as a group, and they craft recommendations that they feel are agency-wide rather than being maybe site-specific. Now, some of them do come from site-specific concerns, but for the most part, they're applicable to the entire DOE complex. So for these recommendations, they are taken as is. What we do is we vote tomorrow as a group, yes or no, that we as a board think this is a good recommendation and we approve it and it goes forward to the other boards. We cannot wordsmith it. We cannot change it. We have to accept it just as it is, yes or no. And I know you've had a chance to read through the recommendations, but Earl is just going to take a minute to go over it with you and see if you have any questions. We don't have one. Do we have one on what?
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, I think it is the true one.
Is there anyone that need me to read over this? Has everybody had a chance to look this over?
You want to give them just a quick rundown on what it is? Just the very basics?
Well, if you flip over, the recommendation reads, the EMSSAB recommends seeking further efficiencies in the WIP TRUE program in order to streamline, expand, and accelerate the true waste disposition. 2, the EMSSAB recommends the DOE prepare for public review information on the expected benefits and the cost of the proposed addition of the WIP facility in terms of more efficient operation of the WIP, an overall reduction in risk around the DOE complex, and increased rate of disposal of the true waste, and the impact of the cost of the facility on other DOE facilities, allowing nearly 1 year buffer of true waste inventory to be stored above ground at WIP for a period of up to a year seems to make sense. And that came from the actual chair's meeting. And again,
Yes. Gil?
Gil?
Earl, thanks a lot. So this is basically just, nutshell for me, the chairs of all the other, and coming together and saying, let's just get this stuff off our site and move to WIP?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other discussions? David?
I was just wondering, David Hoyle Cab, I was just wondering, does WIP have any on-site storage now?
I'm not sure, David. Can anyone answer that? DOE?
Yeah, hi, this is Jim Folk, DOE. They do have some on sites storage capability. Again, they're under restrictions though from their regulators as far as how long that can be there and the like. So they do have some. It's basically designed for interim storage until the material can be taken underground.
I see. So this would be an expansion of what little they have now?
Correct.
Okay.
This may be getting to, Susan Corbett Camp, I'm sorry, this may be getting down in the weeds here, and if it is, just tell me, but I'm just I'm curious as to, did y'all talk about the lifespan of the storage canisters that are interim storage? I mean, are they gonna be repackaged before they go under the ground, or is this, it's gonna go there in its final form, it's just sitting outside waiting to go underground? Is that what I'm understanding here?
I'm pretty sure they'll be reassessed before they're moved again and put in their final destination.
But my question is, do they have the capability at WIP to repackage if necessary, or it'd have to be moved yet one more time?
No, I would assume that they would have the capability to do that.
Can anybody answer that? Do they have the capability to repackage at WIP?
Mr. Terry Spears, to the best of my knowledge, they don't open the
Didn't think
waste
so.
packages. Once they're received at WIP, they would be temporarily stored. And currently, they have very limited above ground, as Jim just mentioned to you, and it's basically just to prepare to move the waste below ground. So they don't open any of it, and they don't repackage it.
So my question then is that it would go there, it would have to go there in whatever container or containment is going to go into the underground. Is that correct?
That is certainly the current case, and I presume that would continue to be the case with this recommendation, although I don't know for sure.
And Michael McElhannis, DOE, that was the context of the discussion at the chair's meeting, was that the sites that ship to WIP ship for, in the final configuration for moving underground. This was really more of a lag storage concept to be able to allow longer storage above ground so that they could, as somebody said, move the stuff off the sites faster and get it to its final destination.
Have the canisters for that process been approved yet? The canister design for that whole scenario?
That would be looked at if in the proposal if the department accepts the recommendation.
Okay, so it hasn't been determined yet. Thank you.
No, I don't know the answer, is what I'm saying. It may very well be. I don't know the answer.
Okay, thank you.
As part of this, that This came from, it was northern New Mexico.
That is correct.
Their CAB. Northern New Mexico has already forwarded a very similar version of this to their site manager for response. And they felt that it warranted the backing of the rest of the board. And so they have already made their feelings known on a local level. They just thought that there should be a more national oomph behind it. And so if you agree with it, if you like the concept of additional true storage or that buffer for disposition, then this might be something for you. Are there any other comments on this one? Yes, Dan.
Dan Kaminsky, CAB. Yeah, just a quick comment on the buffering. It would make the operations there much more efficient as they can queue up and collect specific types of materials that are moving down in. So I don't know how much segregation they may do or choose to do in the future, but they would never have a dry spell where they didn't have something to go store.
Sure. And I'm sure that that's something that they would look at from a technical perspective before they.
It's just pure warehousing and logistics at that point.
Yeah. Anything else? Mr. French?
Yeah, Tom French, the CAB. Just let me give you a couple of comments. If you haven't been to WIP, it is in the heart of the desert, and the cans go as designed today. They're stainless steel 55-gallon drums. They have a stack of paper, the whip whack that goes with them, certifies everything in the drum, so you can't open them up or you'd violate all of the certification that went to them. And they stack drums out there now to give you some buffer for going below ground. But there's no rain. I spent a week out there, and it is really in the heart of the desert. And it's you're going to take them underground, you're going to bury them in salt. So they're designed to deal with that salt. So being above ground is a less harsh environment than it is in the mine. So
That's good information. Thank you. What else are we at? Any other concerns anyone wants to express before we move to vote on this tomorrow? All right. Let's pull up the other one.
Okay, we have the recommendation, cleanup performance roadmap and communication strategy. I got you. And the gist of the story is they want the advisory boards at each of the sites are tasked with providing project priorities on an annual basis. However, this tool allows stakeholders to see DOE EM missions in its totality, provides a high-level overview of each project and allow the advisory boards to have a more comprehensive view of DOE EM's work. So basically, they're tasking us to follow suit with what everybody else is doing.
Things about communicating success across the complex is how do you measure that success for each site? Here you might look at tank closure. How accelerated is that? Paducah, Portsmouth, they don't have tanks. How do you convey the EM success story across the entire complex? And that's what EM1 is asking you to help them figure out, is look at that kind of information. And this recommendation from the chairs was meant to assist in that process. And if I recall, part and parcel of this is if you had information or an idea to append to this, to forward it on, and they'll take comments for a while, but you're thinking about it. You gonna put it up?
Robert Smith, CAB. Well, you made a good point, but the thing is, we don't have any visibility of what the individual sites' metrics are. So it's hard for us to make recommendations on something we're not aware of.
Sure.
But we do know the information that we have, the achievements at the Savannah River site, so I'm assuming we just use what we have.
Yeah. You would talk a little bit.
Yeah, but he was saying make an overall recommendation, and we can make a recommendation based on our own activities, but I don't see how we can see how that would shoehorn into what they're doing without some knowledge of what's going on there, or what their metrics are.
Gil, you grab for yours first.
My question is why? Why do we need that?
Why do you need to communicate the?
Yeah, why do we need to communicate across the entire EM? I mean, I just don't understand.
And maybe that's your
Yeah, I don't
feedback is
understand
that
why
maybe
we have
that
to
model
do it.
doesn't work.
We know what happened at WIP affected us, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So if we have an overall picture of what's going on, we could better understand how it may affect our facility.
Dan, you put your card down, but it was up.
I'll put it up.
Okay, you can put it back down.
I think there's right in the center, sorry, Gil.
No, you're good, man.
Right in the center of the first page there, 1 and 2, a visual roadmap that depicts each site's schedule and key milestones. I think that's critical for us, for the CAB, for Savannah River site, and for the general public, so that we have a holistic view of what's going on. Can you tell me right now off the top of your head which tanks are in the process of being closed today? No, we'd have to do a lot of research. We don't have a visual metrics to see that. So that's kind of taking into some of that into account, and it's talking about each site's specific schedule and key milestones. So I think that's very important to us for Savannah River site. And then the second part is a holistic view of what's DOE EM mission doing in totality. Are they on track? Are they not? Should we all be screaming at Congress to give us more money in general, not just Savannah River site? So I think both of them are admirable. I'm more focused and adamant about the first one because I think we need a visual management system that CAB and the general public can say thumbs up, thumbs down, DOE's doing a good job or a bad job. And I think they're doing a good job, by the way, for the record.
I'm looking forward to reading that recommendation once you get it written, because it's got to be coming.
Well, it was brewing, and then this sort of...
This is pushing it. Good. I want to see it. I can't wait. I really can't. This is, okay. I wasn't sure whose card it was. It looked like it was between two folks.
Dave Bavakis, CAB. There's an agency performance plan that is supported by agency's performance goals. Do we know whether this ties to the agency performance goals?
I cannot answer that for sure. Let's be honest. Basically, we just stuck with what the parameters were for each site. I mean, a couple of things we talked about were tank closures and the SDU facility. And that was one thing that stuck out in my head, that they've completed that tank pretty much in, before time and getting that up and running. So that was a milestone that I thought that stuck out in my head for the Savannah River site, and again, the closing of the tanks.
Because Dave Bavakis, CAB, there's an agency performance update that is prepared every year, and then all the work that goes on would be reflected in those updates. So I'm trying to see the linkage.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, will the DHEC's and the EPA's reports reflect in with this? That's what you're asking? Yeah, I would see no reason why it wouldn't.
I think that was the goal, is that it was going to be included in that. And I think this communication strategy is just supposed to be more user-friendly so that people can actually visually see that, because as agency strategic plans are sometimes a little complex. So I think the goal of this was just that there would be very easy performance metrics that people can pick up, see what's been done, and see what is supposed to be done.
Mike Michelanis, DOE. Nina actually made the point I was about to. I think Sue Kaines, when she put the challenge before the chairs, was to do exactly what Nina just said. Yes, there are some updates that are done with the agencies, but they can be arcane, they can be a little technobabble at times. And she was laying the challenge before all the chairs of, okay, help us craft a set of performance measures, performance indicators that the public would like, that the public can digest and understand. So she was looking for something a little bit broad, and these two things seem to have hit the mark. At least the folks that were sitting around the table didn't stand up and give mid-course guidance as to go left or right there.
Gil, did you want to add something? 'Cause
refocus a little bit on what we're talking about. This one thing is the chair's recommendation in front of you, which essentially says that this kind of information is good to have and good to distribute. The other piece where I'm talking about identifying some of those metrics, that may be a separate discussion that you want to have, that will forward that information to the department on if you were measuring SRS successes, what would that look like? And so that's a little bit of a separate discussion from this right here on whether or not you find this a valuable use of the department's time. Gil?
I want to thank Dan for saying you just pretty much reset Dan's words. I'm a big scope. I've talked about the scope of what the Savannah Riverside Citizens Advisory Board is about, and I think this takes us a little bit out of it, out of what we talk about. I'm all for SRS and the things that Dan's passionate about and getting that. I think those are wonderful things. But when we start stepping out and saying it's an entire EM, we're kind of jumping over what we're supposed to do. That's just.
I will say that there was, in the discussion, unless you guys want to talk about it, there was a little bit of discussion about scope at the chairs meeting a couple weeks ago. It was specifically pertaining to this. And I will say most definitely this is not the first draft. Okay, so they reined in what they originally had, brought it back into what made sense to DOE having it within your scope. So from a scope perspective, this fits. This has been blessed and approved. Okay. Any other comments? Oh, yes, Mr. Vavakis.
Dave Vavakis, Cab. I guess my concern is there's already a formal framework in place. Why would we want to build something outside of that existing framework to measure? Why can't we have something that supports that or works within that existing framework?
And I think this is going hand in hand with it, and it's not to make any more work for the department. It's just to simplify what's already being done. I'm sure you've seen in your manual the flow charts. Brian Hennessy normally gives those out, where we have these amazing charts that show us the milestones.
Oh, we haven't given them the swim lanes yet.
You haven't seen those yet, but it's fine. And a lot of other cabs don't actually have a lot of the information that we're given. And I think the goal is that it's to be synthesized in a very easy way that people can come and just see simply what the cabs, what the Department of Energy has accomplished.
Tom.
Yeah, Tom French, the cab. So I did this, you didn't all see this, I just showed this to her. I said, is this what we're talking about, a graphic representation of progress? So that you can share that, and then every site would have their own? Is that the idea? But they'd all be in a standard format, standard information. But then the public was here, and we're here, we can all say, we closed these 3 tanks, we're moving on the melter. I mean, we know a lot of this stuff, and you could graphically represent it and be a great communication tool. I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
It is, and one of the side conversations that I had with some of the other chairs is that we sometimes forget that the average adult American reads on a 6th grade level. We don't talk about that, but that's when most government documents, like when you go to get your DMV and things, it has to be written on a 6th grade level. And if you see the information that we put out for the public, it is not something that a general public person who's not invested in this can easily understand. And the goal is to do exactly what you're saying, is to make it easy so that people can see clearly the goals and what's been done. But yeah, I was very opposed to this recommendation at first, and like James said, this has changed a bit and softened, and it's what we have now. But good feedback.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? We're ready for this tomorrow? All right, great. I just got sent a photograph of the public comment sign-in sheet, which was incredibly blank. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have public comment anyway. Does anybody wish to say anything? Going once, going twice? Before we wrap up, I would like to note the incredible amount of rain that we seem to have received today. please be careful driving home. The roads will be wet, and no matter how great your infrastructure is, when you get a large volume of rain in a short amount of time, there will be puddles. So please be careful.
And admin and outreach?
Admin and outreach will be in the hallway over there. Nina, would you like to close us out for the
No,
day?
I'm good. Just tomorrow, is it 8:30 or 9 tomorrow?
9 a.m. See everyone in the morning. Thank you.